Welcome back to Potter Red, where the old magic still runs deep. Today's story: the Goblin Nation named Harry Friend of the Deep at age 5 and swore to guard his blood. If you haven't already, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Stranger Who Bled. Silver Number 4, Privet Drive, kept its curtains straight and its hedges square, and it did not like to be surprised. On the last Saturday of a warm May, it got its wish for exactly one morning, which was as long as any wish in that house ever lasted. Harry Potter was awake before the milk float. He knew the sound of it the way other children knew the theme to their favorite programs, the clink and rattle turning in at the top of the road, the bottles set down 2 by 2. He lay in the dark of the cupboard under the stairs and counted the bottles by ear, and when he reached the Dursleys' 4 he stopped, because 4 was the number that belonged to this house, and he liked things that added up. He was 5 years old, and he had learned that the trick to mornings was to be useful before anyone asked. If the bacon was already turning when Aunt Petunia came down, she said less. If the table was laid and the post was fetched, Uncle Vernon read his paper and did not look up. Harry had worked all this out by watching patiently over a great many mornings and by keeping very quiet while he did it. Quiet was a tool. He kept it sharp. He dressed in the gray light that leaked under the cupboard door. His clothes had been Dudley's first and had given up caring what shape a person was. He rolled the cuffs. He tied his laces in the double knot he had taught himself, because a loose lace on the stairs was a fall, and a fall was a fuss, and a fuss was never worth what it cost. By the time Aunt Petunia's slippers came whispering along the hall, the kettle was filled and the pan was warming, and Harry was standing on the stool at the counter with his sleeves pushed back. "You're up," she said, which from her was almost a whole sentence. "Good morning, Aunt Petunia," he said. "I put the kettle on." She looked at the kettle as though it might have done it on its own and been better for the lack of him. But she did not send him away, and he counted that a small victory and cracked the eggs to her liking, one hand, no shell. Dudley thundered down at 8:30, already in a temper because it was the weekend and there was no one to be cruel to at school. He shoved past Harry to get at the television, and Harry stepped off the line of him without seeming to, a trick learned early, becoming a shadow of himself against the wall until the danger had gone by. Uncle Vernon came last, filling the doorway, smelling of the cologne he wore on Saturdays because Saturdays were for visiting. And today they were visiting a man from the office who had a boat and a house near the coast, and none of it, not 1 minute of it, was for Harry. "He can't come," Uncle Vernon said over the top of Harry's head to Aunt Petunia in the particular voice adults use for a thing they have already decided. "I've rung Arabella," said Aunt Petunia. "She'll have him. That madcap." "She's cheap," said Aunt Petunia, and that settled it. Harry ate his toast standing at the counter and did not say that he would rather go to Mrs. Figg's than to the coast with the Dursleys, because it was true, and because saying true things at that table generally made them stop being possible. Mrs. Figg's house smelled of boiled cabbage and old wool, and there were photographs of cats on every surface, some of them framed like the portraits of relations who had done well in life. But Mrs. Figg let him sit in the garden. She did not mind him being there. That was the whole of what Harry wanted from a day, most days, to be somewhere that did not mind him. They left him on her step at 10 with a bag that had nothing in it he needed, and the car pulled away with Dudley's face pressed flat and gloating against the rear window, and Harry lifted his hand to wave anyway, because a wave cost nothing, and he had already learned that you gave things away cheap when they cost you nothing, and you were owed nothing back. "There you are, dear," said Mrs. Figg, opening the door before he had knocked. She had a way of being expecting him. "Mind Mr. Tibbles on the stairs. He's in one of his moods." Mr. Tibbles, an enormous marmalade cat with a face like a disappointed magistrate, watched Harry come in and did not move from the exact center of the hall, so that Harry had to go around, which he did, murmuring "excuse me" to the cat because it seemed rude not to. Mrs. Figg behind him made a small sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough, and when he looked back she was watching him with an expression he could not name and did not try to. She gave him weak orange squash and a plate of biscuits that had gone soft, and she talked, mostly to herself, about the cats, and Harry answered when it was polite to answer and was quiet the rest of the time. When she settled into her chair by the window with her knitting, and the click of the needles slowed and her chin came down by degrees toward her chest, Harry took his squash out to the garden and sat on the back step in the sun. The garden ran down to a fence, and past the fence was the strip of ground the council never got round to, a long tangle of nettle and bramble and cow parsley that followed the line of the old railway cutting behind the houses. Nobody went there. Dudley's gang thought it was full of rats, which it was, and that made it the finest place Harry knew, because a place full of rats was a place empty of Dudley. There was a gap in Mrs. Figg's fence where a board had rotted through. Harry had found it the first time she had ever kept him, and he had never told her, and he was fairly sure she knew and had never told him she knew, which was the closest thing to a secret he had ever shared with a grown-up. He finished his squash. He listened to the needles stop, then he went through the gap and into the green. It was cooler under the cutting and loud with insects, and the light came down in coins through the leaves and moved on the ground when the wind moved. Harry knew the paths the animal runs through, the long grass, the flat stone where he liked to sit, the place where the parsley grew tall enough to close over his head so that he could stand in the middle of it and be nowhere at all. He walked slowly and touched things. A boy who was not allowed to touch things at home learned to touch everything he could reach when he was somewhere that did not keep count. He was most of the way to the flat stone when he heard the breathing. It was wrong breathing. Harry knew the sound of a person who had been running and the sound of a person who was crying and the sound of Uncle Vernon after the stairs, and this was none of those. It came in scrapes like a saw that had struck a nail. He went still in the parsley and looked, and through the stems he saw an old man lying in the nettles at the foot of the embankment, one leg folded under him at a shape a leg should not make, a walking stick fallen beyond the reach of his hand. The sensible thing, the Dudley thing, would have been to go the other way. Old men who fell in nettle patches behind the houses were exactly the sort of thing you were told to leave alone. But the man's face had gone the color of a candle, and his hand kept reaching for the stick and not finding it, opening and closing on the empty air, and Harry found that his own feet had already carried him out of the parsley before he had decided anything at all. "You've fallen," Harry said, because it seemed important to say a true thing first. "I'll get your stick." The stick had rolled into the brambles. He worked it free, and the thorns took the back of his hand in 3 long scratches, and he did not stop to look at them because a scratch was nothing. He brought the stick back and laid it in the old man's reaching hand, and the fingers closed on it and gripped, and the breathing eased by a single notch. The man turned his head. His eyes were very dark, darker than seemed usual, and they moved over Harry's face with an attention that was not old man attention at all, quick and total, the look of something measuring. "Boy," the man said in a voice like gravel poured slow. "Whose are you?" It was a strange question, and Harry answered the true part of it. "Nobody's really," he said. "I mean, I live with my aunt, but I'm out for the day." Something crossed the old man's face at that, some brief tightening. "Nobody's," he repeated, and made a sound in his chest that might have been pain and might have been a laugh gone wrong. "Does your leg hurt?" Harry asked. "I could fetch Mrs. Figg. She's got a telephone." "No." The word came fast and hard and then softer, mendied. "No, no telephone, no Figg. Sit a moment." Old bones knit slow. "Sit, and I will be well." Harry sat. He did not sit close because you did not crowd a hurt thing. He knew that from the dog 2 doors down that had been hit by the post van, but he sat within reach on the flat of a root and he waited. The insects went on. Somewhere up on the embankment a train went by and the ground under them hummed with it, and the old man's dark eyes closed and opened with the sound of it, counting it, Harry thought, the way Harry himself counted things. "You did not run," the old man said when the train had gone. "You were hurt. Children run from what is strange. It is sense. Their mothers teach it." The dark eyes came back to Harry and held him. "Who taught you to stay?" Harry thought about that because it deserved a true answer and he did not have one ready. "Nobody taught me," he said at last. "I just thought you want somebody to stay. I always do." The old man was quiet for a long moment. His breathing had steadied. When he spoke again there was something in his voice that had not been there, a care in the placing of words, like a person setting down something heavy on a shelf that might not hold. "You always do," he said. "Yes, I think you do." He shifted and levered himself up on the stick until he was sitting more than lying, his ruined leg out before him, and as he moved something fell from a fold of his coat and rang once on the flat stone and lay there shining. Harry looked at it. He had never in his life seen anything so fine. It was a coin, or it was shaped like a coin, round and heavy-looking and larger than a 50-pence, and it was made of a silver that was not like the silver of spoons or of the milk bottle tops he sometimes flattened for the pattern. This silver had a weather in it. There were clouds moving under its surface, dark and pale, turning slow, and around its rim there ran a line of marks that were not letters he knew, deep-cut and sharp, and in the center was a shape he could not quite hold with his eyes, a doorway, or a mountain with a doorway in it, or a mountain that was also a door. When the coin caught the light, the marks seemed to run like water and then to still again. It was warm-looking, even lying in shade. It was the most beautiful thing Harry had ever seen, and it was lying on the stone between them, and no one in all the world knew it was there but the two of them. The old man had gone very still. He was not looking at the coin. He was looking at Harry, and his stillness had a quality Harry recognized because it was his own quality, the stillness of a person who has learned to watch and be watched and give nothing away. Harry picked up the coin. It was heavier than it looked and warmer, and it hummed very faintly against his fingers, a note too low to hear, felt in the bones of the hand. The clouds under its surface pulled at his eye. He turned it once, and the doorway in the mountain seemed to open a hair's breadth wider, and he understood in the wordless way that children understand important things, that he was holding something that mattered enormously, that he could put in his pocket and carry away and no one would ever know that would be his, the first thing that had ever been only his. He leaned across and put it in the old man's hand. "You dropped this," Harry said. "It's yours." The old man did not take it at once. His fingers stayed open under the coin, not closing, and he looked down at it lying in his own palm as though Harry had handed him something he had not thought to see again, and then he looked up, and for the length of one breath the old man's face was not there. The face beneath it was not a man's face. The skin had drawn back and gone gray-brown and fine-grained like old leather worked soft. The nose had lengthened and hooked. The ears rose to points at the tops. The fingers around the coin were longer than a man's fingers, with a knuckle too many in each, and the nails on them were dark and thick and filed to shape. The eyes were the same dark measuring eyes, but set now in a face made of angles, a shrewd and ancient and entirely inhuman face, and it was watching Harry to see what he would do. Harry looked at the face. He did not move away from it. He had spent his whole life being told he was strange, and he had learned that the worst thing you could do to a strange thing was flinch, because flinching told it what it already feared, that it was wrong to be what it was. So he did not flinch. He looked because it was a remarkable face and he had never seen one like it, and then because the silence had gone on and it seemed his turn to say something, he said the thing that was truest in him. Does the face hurt too, or just the leg? Human face changed. The hard line of the mouth moved, and the dark eyes creased at their corners, and a sound came out of the creature that was low and rough and went on for some time, and Harry realized he was being laughed at, but not unkindly, not the Dudley way. It was the laugh of someone who has been surprised into it against long habit. Just the leg, the creature said, and the voice was the same gravel voice as before, though it fit the new face better than the old one. Just the leg, Harry Potter. Harry went still. You know my name. I know your name. The creature drew the coin in at last, closed the long fingers over it, and the silver's light went out between them like a lamp shuddered. I have known your name longer than you have. I knew your father's name and his father's, back and back, further than you have years to count. My people keep names. It is one of the things we do. The dark eyes moved over Harry again, that quick total measuring, and this time Harry felt the measuring land and settle, felt himself weighed on some scale he could not see, and he did not know whether he had come out heavy or light. You returned a made thing to its maker's hand, the creature said slowly, freely, taking nothing when you might have kept it and none the wiser. Do you know what you have done? Given you your coin back, Harry said. It was only fair. It's yours. It is mine. Something moved in the creature's voice, something old and enormous held very carefully still, the way a person holds a full cup. Yes, it is mine, and it will be mine when you and I are both under the ground, because I made it, and among my people the maker owns the made thing to the ending of the world, whoever holds it, wherever it wanders. There is no wizard in 100 years who would have given it back. There is no man alive who has given goblin silver freely into a goblin's hand and asked for nothing. The dark eyes held him. You did not even know it could be asked for. Goblin, Harry said. He tried the word. It felt true, the way the coin had felt warm, a fact arriving whole. You're a goblin. I am Grenduk, said the goblin, of the 9th ledger of the nation of the deep, keeper of reckonings, once of the Iron Guard, and I was old when your grandmother's grandmother was in her cradle. He inclined his head, a movement brief and exact, grave as a bow in a court. I am pleased to know you, Harry Potter, whose blood I have watched over longer than you would believe if I told you. Harry did not fully understand this, but he understood that he had been paid a courtesy, and he had a strong instinct about courtesies, which was that you returned them. He got up off the root and he put his heels together in imitation of a man he had once seen bow in a black and white film Aunt Petunia had left on, and he made a bow of his own, wobbling a little because 5-year-olds are not built for bowing. I'm pleased to know you too, Mr. Grenduk, he said, even though your leg's broken. Grenduk regarded him. The clouds were still moving under the surface of the day, coins of light shifting on the ground, and the insects went on, and up and down the green cutting nothing at all had changed, and everything had. Sit down again, Grenduk said, and his voice had gone quiet in a way that made Harry obey without thinking. The leg is not so broken as it looks, my kind mend, but I am not ready to walk yet, and there are things I would ask you while we wait, if you will answer an old goblin's questions. I'll answer the true ones, Harry said, sitting. I'm not very good at the other kind. Good, said Grenduk. Neither am I, so they sat in the green under the railway, a goblin and a boy of 5, and Grenduk asked his questions, and Harry answered the true part of each of them, which was the only part he had. Grenduk asked where he slept, and Harry told him about the cupboard, not as a complaint, because he did not know it was one, but as a fact, the way you would say which room was yours. Grenduk's dark eyes did not change while Harry spoke, but the long fingers closed once around the silver coin and did not open again for a while. Grenduk asked what he ate, and Harry told him, and again it was told as fact and not as grievance, the bacon he cooked and did not always get to finish, the biscuits gone soft, the bread he sometimes kept back and hid so that a hungry evening would not catch him with nothing. And at that, without a word, Harry took from the deep front pocket of his too large trousers a heel of bread wrapped in a paper napkin, the one he had saved that very morning without knowing why, and he broke it in two and held half across to Grenduk. You should eat, Harry said. You went white before. Aunt Petunia goes white when she doesn't eat, and then she's cross for hours. Grenduk looked at the bread. It was poor bread, dry at the edge, a child's whole store against a hungry night, and it was being offered to him by a hand scratched 3 ways across the back from a bramble, and the offering was made without any knowledge at all of what it was worth, which is the only way the largest things are ever given. I have eaten, Grenduk said, which was not quite a lie, and closed Harry's fingers gently back over the bread with his own long hand. Keep it. A friend does not take the last of a friend's store. That is a law older than gold. He paused. But I thank you for the offer of it, Harry Potter. I will remember the offer. My people remember everything. It is our curse and our craft. Harry put the bread away. He had understood one word out of every three, and the one word that had gone all the way and was friend, because it was a word that had never once been used about him, and he turned it over in the dark of himself as he had turned the coin, warm and heavy and impossibly his. You said you knew my father, Harry said. He kept his voice level because it was a dangerous subject, a subject that at home earned a slap or a locked door, the whole of what he had ever been told being that his parents had died in a car crash and had been Uncle Vernon's word useless. Did you, really? I did not know him as a friend knows a friend, Grenduk said. I knew him as the nation knows a house. James Fleamont Potter kept his accounts with us, as his father did, and his father's father, and every Potter back to the one whose name matters. He was quick with his tongue and slow to break faith, which is a rare pairing among wizards, who are as a rule the other way about. He came into the deep 3 times in his life that I stood upon the marble and watched him pass, and each time he took off his hat to the tellers, which no wizard does, and once he corrected a clerk who had shorted himself 2 sickles in the nation's favor and would not leave until the ledger was made honest against his own purse. Grenduk's dark eyes rested on Harry unblinking. He would not be cheated, and he would not cheat. That is the whole of what a goblin asks of a man. Your father was owed our respect, and we do not give it lightly, and we did not take it back when he died. Harry held very still, because he had a store of true things about his parents now that numbered exactly 1 more than it had that morning, and he did not want to spill it by moving. And my mother, Lily Potter, I saw once, said Grenduk. She came to open her own vault, which married women of the wizard kind seldom trouble to keep, and she counted her own gold, coin by coin, and thanked the goblin who brought it up from below by his name, which she had asked for and remembered. A wizard who learns a goblin's name and uses it is a wizard who thinks a goblin has a name worth learning. He paused. There are not 10 such in a century. She was one, and you, it would seem, are her son. Something moved in Harry's chest, warm and unfamiliar, and he did not have a word for it, and did not go looking for one, because looking for words for such things generally made them go away. He only nodded, and after a moment he asked what the marks on the coin meant, to have somewhere safe to put his eyes. They talked a while more of small things, of the cats, of the rats, of the marks on the coin, which Grenduk would not fully explain but named as reckonings, which he said were a kind of counting that was also a kind of promising, and Harry said he liked counting, and Grenduk went quiet again at that, in what Harry was coming to recognize as the goblin having heard something under the words. The sun moved. On the far side of the fence, faintly, a screen door banged and a reedy voice called a name that was not Harry's yet, but soon would be. That's Mrs. Fig, Harry said. She'll have woken up. I have to go back before she worries. She does worry. She pretends she doesn't. He got to his feet and brushed the seat of his trousers. Then he stopped, because leaving felt suddenly like a thing that ought to be marked, and he did not know how, and so he stood there with the question plain on his face. Grenduk saw it. He turned the silver coin once more in his fingers, and then he did a thing he had not done in the memory of anyone living, and would have to answer for and did not care. He took a second object from within his coat. It was smaller than the coin, a flat oval of the same weathering silver, dull, unmarked, but for a single deep-cut line curved like the beginning of a spiral, threaded on a cord of some dark braided stuff. He leaned forward over his ruined leg, and he hung it around Harry's neck and tucked it down inside the collar of the too-large shirt where no ant would find it. This is a small thing, Grenduk said. It is not the coin, do not confuse them. But it is goblin-made, and it is given, and a given thing carries a debt, and my people pay their debts to the last reckoning in this world and under it. Wear it and tell no one. Ever you are in a hardness you cannot get out of, hold it in your fist and say my name into it, all of it, the whole of it, and say, Grenduk, I am in need. Say it aloud, it will be heard, it may not be answered fast, but it will be heard, and my people do not forget a thing they have heard. The dark eyes held Harry's level and cert. Do you understand me? Hold it and say your name and I am in need, Harry repeated, and say it aloud, and it will be heard. Grenduk sat back. Go now. Before your fig comes through the fence and finds an old man where no old man should be. Go, Harry Potter, whose blood I have kept, we will meet again, sooner than either of us thinks, unless I am a fool, and I have not been a fool in 300 years. Harry went. At the gap in the fence he stopped and looked back, because you looked back at a friend. That was another thing he had just learned. Grenduk had not moved. He sat among the nettles with his stick across his knees and the coin closed in his fist, and the coins of light moved over him, and he lifted one long hand once in a gesture that was not quite a wave and was more like a promise, and Harry lifted his own scratched hand in return, and then he ducked through the gap into Mrs. Fig's garden, and the green closed behind him. There you are, said Mrs. Fig on the step, wringing her apron. Her eyes went to the scratches on his hand, and then quick to the collar of his shirt, and then back to his face, and Harry had the odd sense she had been about to ask him something and had decided not to. Nettles again. You'll be the death of me wandering. Come and I'll put something on those, and there's more biscuits if the tin hasn't gone soft. "Thank you, Mrs. Fig," Harry said and meant it and went in, and the flat oval of silver lay warm against his chest under the shirt where nobody knew. Grenduk sat in the green a long while after the child had gone. The leg did mend slowly, the bone drawing itself right with the deep steady patience of goblin flesh, and when at last he could stand he stood and tested his weight and found it held. He did not go at once. He looked at the fence and past the fence at the backs of the houses, all of them the same square hedges and the same straight curtains, and he found the fourth one along without needing to count, because he had counted it many times before on many quiet nights standing in gardens like this one, keeping a watch that the child within had never known was kept. For that was the shape of it, and Grenduk turned it over now in the cold, clear part of his mind that had made him a keeper of reckonings. The nation did not send its ledger masters into the sunlit world for pleasure. He had come, as he came once in every turning of the season, to lay eyes upon the last living blood of the House of Potter, because the House of Potter held a place in the deep ledgers that almost no wizarding house held, a place written in a hand 300 years dead, in an ink that the nation reckoned dearer than gold, the ink of a debt of honor unpaid, uncancelled, carried forward season upon season, waiting. He had come to look and to go as he had done for 4 years, since the night the child was left upon a step like a bottle of milk. He had not meant to fall. Age was age, even for a goblin, and the embankment was steep, and his glamour had been holding the shape of a frail old man so long that the frailty had begun to be true. He had lain in the nettles and reached for his stick and thought, with the flat, unafraid clarity of the very old, that he might die there in the sun among the weeds behind the houses of men, and that it would be a poor reckoning to have kept the watch 4 years and end it in a nettle patch. And then a child had come out of the tall grass, a child who lived in a cupboard and saved his bread against hunger, and had learned to make himself a shadow on a wall, and the child had not run. The child had fetched his stick and torn his own hand doing it and thought nothing of the tearing. The child had offered to share the last of his bread with a stranger, and the child had picked up a keeper's reckoning mark, goblin silver worked with the doorway of the deep, the most beautiful and most takeable thing his eyes had ever fallen on, and had weighed it in his hand for one breath and had given it back freely, taking nothing. Not knowing it could be kept, not knowing it could be sold, not knowing it was worth a muggle's house and everything in the muggle's house besides, knowing only that a made thing belonged in its maker's hand because that was fair. There was a word among the nation for a wizard who did such a thing. It had not been spoken of a living man in a very long time. Grenduk did not speak it now alone in the green, because there were words you did not say aloud until you were ready to answer for them before the council, and this was one, and he was not yet ready, but he could feel it in his chest like a coal, and he knew that he would carry it down into the deep and lay it before the 12 ledgers, and that after he had spoken it, nothing above or below the ground would be quite the same. The last Potter. And the debt of Iegan Potter, which the nation had carried 300 years and never once let fall from the ledger. Grenduk had been young when it happened, young as goblins reckon it, an ironcaster's apprentice with the forge smoke still new in his lungs. He remembered the goblin wars the way men remember a fever, in heat and fragments. He remembered the wizard kind coming down into the lower halls after the third rising was broken, coming with their wands lit and their writs signed, to take back the goblin craft the rebels had made and hidden, and to take, too, the reckoning relics of the goblin dead, the work silver name marks that the nation lays with its fallen, so that no goblin need go nameless into the dark. Wizard law in that hard century held such things to be spoils. Goblin silver was goblin silver, the ministry said, whether it hung on a warrior or lay upon a bier, and it would be gathered up and melted and struck into galleons to pay the cost of the very war that had killed the ones who wore it. Iegan Potter had stood in the ministry road and refused the order. He held a warrant of his own, being a man of standing, and he used it not to take but to give back. He had ridden down into the broken halls under a flag the nation had not seen a wizard carry before, and he had brought with him, on 3 carts under sacking, every reckoning relic the wizard's scavengers had already stripped from the goblin dead, and he had laid them upon the marble before the council of that age, and said, in the nation's own hearing, that a made thing belonged to its maker and a name belonged to the one who had borne it, and that he would not let his people melt down another folk's dead for coin while there was breath in him to prevent it. It had cost him. It had cost his house. Wizards do not love a man who chooses goblins over gold, and the Potters had been the poorer and the more suspect for it ever after, and had never once in 3 centuries sent to the nation to ask the debt repaid. That was the ink in the deep ledger. That was the unpaid honor that Grenduk had come, season upon season, to keep watch. And here at the bottom of it was a 5-year-old in a dead man's cut-down clothes, who had done without teaching, without knowing, in the space of one warm afternoon, the very thing his ancestor had done. He had given goblin silver back into a goblin's hand because a made thing belonged with the one who made it. The blood had come round. The blood remembered even when the child did not. Grenduk had not been a fool in 300 years. He did not intend to start now. He drew his glamour close, the frail old man folding back over him like a coat, and he took up his stick, and he walked out of the green, cutting the way the very old walk without hurry, because hurry was for those who feared they would run out of time, and Grenduk feared no such thing. He had all the time there was. His people had counted it and kept it, and they did not lose what they kept. He walked to the mouth of the alley behind the shops where the shadows pooled deep enough, and he looked once more over the rooftops at the fourth house from the corner, where a 5-year-old was at that moment being dabbed with antiseptic by a squib who watched him for a different master, and could not have said why her heart was sore. Then Grenduk turned the reckoning mark over in his palm one final time, and the doorway in the mountain caught the last of the light and seemed to open, and the goblin stepped into the dark between one breath and the next, and was gone from the world of men, down and down, toward the deep and the halls of his people, and the council that would decide what was owed. The Dursleys came for Harry at 7:30, and the day had done Uncle Vernon good, so that he only cuffed the back of Harry's head once absently, for having tracked Green on Mrs. Figg's carpet, and told him to get in the car. Dudley had a paper hat from the coast and a sunburn and a bag of rock the color of a bruise, and he ate the rock loudly the whole way home so that Harry would know he had it, and Harry did not. Harry sat in the middle of the back seat with his hands in his lap and his chin down, and let none of it reach him, because there was a warmth against his breastbone that no rock and no cuff could touch, a flat oval of silver on a dark cord where nobody knew to look. He was made to go straight to the cupboard. That was no punishment tonight. He wanted it. He drew the door to and heard the little click of the latch, and in the dark he lay down on the thin mattress among the spiders and the shoes, and only then did he take the token out from under his shirt and hold it up in the narrow bar of landing light that came under the door. It did not shine the way the coin had shone. It was dull and worn and marked with only the one deep curve, the beginning of a spiral that went nowhere and promised somewhere. But it was warm, warmer than his own skin, and when he closed it in his fist he could feel the low hum of it in the bones of his hand, that note beneath hearing, steady as a thing that meant to keep going for a very long time. He did not say Grenduk's name into it. There was no hardness he could not get out of, not tonight. Tonight had been, on the whole, the best day of his life, and he was not going to waste a promise like that on a good day. He only held the token and looked at the bar of light and thought about the word friend, and about a father who took off his hat to tellers, and a mother who learned a goblin's name and used it, and an old goblin among the nettles who had said, "My people do not forget a thing they have heard." Harry closed his eyes. He did not know that beneath the streets of London, further down than pipes or trains or the deepest cellar any muggle had ever dug, an old goblin was at that hour climbing the black stair toward a hall of the 12 ledgers with a name in his mouth he had not yet spoken aloud. He knew only that somewhere below the ordinary world there were people who remembered his father kindly, and who had called him friend, and that he had something of theirs kept safe against his heart. He fell asleep holding it, and for once he did not dream of the green light and the laughing that came sometimes in the dark, but of a doorway in a mountain opening. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Council of the Reckoning. There is a stair beneath London that no muggle has ever numbered, though a great many have walked over its head, buying newspapers and missing trains, never guessing that under the pavement the world keeps going down. Grenduk came to the top of it by ways that need not be told, and set his foot upon the first tread, and began the descent that his people have made since before the Romans laid a single stone above. The black stair is cut from the living rock in a single unbroken spiral, and it does not hurry, and it does not end where a man would expect it to end. It goes down past the clay and past the chalk, and past the old dark riverbeds that ran when the island was young, down to where the rock forgets the sun entirely and remembers only pressure and time. The air changes as you go. It loses the taste of weather and takes on the taste of stone and iron and the far-off breath of fire, and it grows not colder as the ignorant expect, but warmer, for the deep is close to the great heat of the world, and the nation has always lived at the edge of that furnace where the making is easiest and the metal runs. Grenduk went down with the ease of the very old, one hand trailing the wall, and the wall was not smooth. Every span of it was worked. 3,000 years of goblin hands had cut the record of the nation into the stone of the black stair, a history in relief that unspooled beside the descending goblin like a scroll with no beginning that he could see and no end. The founding of the first forge, the striking of the first true coin, the coming of the wizards with their wands and their hunger, the wars, the treaties written and the treaties broken, always by the same hand and never by the nations. He passed the panel of the third rising, where the carvers had cut the wizard scavengers stripping the goblin dead, and he passed, a little below it, the panel that the nation had added after, the one that showed a lone wizard on a road with a warrant held over his head and 3 carts behind him under sacking. There was a name cut beneath that panel in the deep script, and it was the only wizard's name that appeared anywhere on the whole descending record, and Grenduk touched it as he passed, as he always did, 2 fingers to the cold stone, the way a man might touch a doorframe leaving home. Again. The stair led him out at last onto the high gallery above the deep, and the deep opened below him, and even after 5.5 centuries of coming home to it, Grenduk stopped. No word in the tongue of wizards is large enough for what lay under him. Cavern is a word for a hole in a hill. This was a country with a roof. The floor of it fell away below the gallery into distances that swallowed the eye, tier upon tier of worked stone descending toward a red glow that was the light of the great forge fires, and far beneath even those, the sullen shine of the world's own heat. Bridges of black iron leapt the gulfs, thin as harp strings at that height, and goblins crossed them, thousands of goblins, the whole ceaseless traffic of a nation about its work, and their lamps made a slow drift of gold across the dark like the wandering of stars that had come down to be useful. The reckoning fires burned in their iron cressets along the terraces, green and gold in the deep blue that goblins burn for morning, and the light of them climbed the walls and lost itself in a vault so high that it kept its own weather, and thin cold mist gathered up there and fell again as a rain that never reached the floor. Somewhere below, muffled by miles of stone, a dragon turned in its sleep, and the whole deep shivered with the sound, a long note in the rock that a goblin feels in the roots of his teeth and calls without irony music. This was the nation of the deep. This was what the wizard world imagined when it imagined it at all as a bank, a marble hall and a row of clerks and a cart tried to vault. The marble hall was real. It was the topmost room of the topmost tier, the one place the nation permitted wizards to see, and it was to the deep entire what a shop front is to the whole of the city behind it. Below it went down the forges and the founding halls, the deep libraries where the ledgers were kept, the morning vaults of the goblin dead with their silver name marks glimmering, the courts and the workshops and the long dwelling terraces where goblin children were born and raised and taught the 3 things a goblin must know: how to make, how to reckon, and how to keep faith. It was a civilization, whole and ancient and entirely its own, and it had learned across 3,000 years that its survival lay in letting the tall folk above believe it was nothing more than a strong room with teeth. Grenduk descended from the gallery by the near bridge, and the goblins he passed gave him the courtesy of his office, a touch of the brow with 2 fingers, for a keeper of reckonings ranks high, and he returned it, for courtesy that only flows one way is not courtesy but tribute, and the nation had opinions about tribute. He did not go to his own halls, though his bones asked for them. He went along the second terrace, past the founding halls where the air rang and glowed and the ironcasters bent over their molds, to a doorway cut in the shape of an open book, and beneath the doorway a threshold stone worn into a hollow by the passage of 10,000 years of feet, and beyond it the deep library and the keeping place of the ledger of names. Grissla was there as she was always there, because the dead do not stop needing their names kept, and Grissla had never in 400 years trusted the keeping of them to anyone else. She was old even by the reckoning of the deep, older than Grenduk by a century and more, and where age had made him spare it had made her formidable, a compact and upright figure at a lectern of black iron, her hands, which had written more names than there are stars a man can see, moving over a page of beaten silver with a stylus that left lines of cold fire that cooled to script. She did not look up when he came in. She never looked up until she was ready, and it was one of the oldest jokes of the deep that a goblin could die of old age waiting on Grisla's convenience, and Grenduk, who had known her longer than most goblins live, stood at the proper distance and waited, because he had come to ask her a great thing and it did not become him to hurry the asking. "You touched Iagon's name on the stair," Grissla said when she was ready. Still she did not look up. "You always touch it. But today you touched it and then you came here and you did not go home first, and your boots are gray with the dust of the sunlit world, which means you have been up under the sky, which a keeper of reckonings does but 4 times in a year, and this is not one of the 4 times. Now she looked up, and her eyes were the eyes of the very old of her kind, dark and dry and depthless, and they went over Grenduk the way his own had gone over Harry in the Green. So, the last potter. What has the last potter done that has brought you to the ledger of names out of your season, with dust on your boots and a word in your mouth you have not yet had the courage to say aloud? "You have not lost your craft," said Grenduk. "I have lost nothing, that is the craft." She set down her stylus. "Speak." So Grenduk spoke there in the deep library among the silver ledgers of the goblin dead, and he told her the whole of it plainly in order, because Grissla had no patience for a tale told any other way. The fall in the nettles, the child who did not run, the child who tore his hand fetching a stranger's stick and thought nothing of the tearing, the child who offered the last of his bread and would have gone hungry for a goblin's sake and did not know it. And then he told her of the reckoning mark, how it had fallen and lain shining on the stone between them, worth a wizard's house and all the wizard's house held, and how the child had waited 1 breath in his hand and given it back freely, taking nothing, not knowing that it could be kept, not knowing that it could be asked for, knowing only that a made thing belonged with the one who made it. Grissla was silent for a long time when he had finished. Silence. The cold fire cooled to script on the silver page under her hand, and somewhere in the deeps of the library a page turned itself over in one of the ledgers that keep themselves. "You know what you're telling me," she said at last. "I know what I am telling you. You are telling me that the thing written in the deep ledger 300 years ago has come round again in the blood, that Iagon's deed was not a single deed of a single strange wizard to be honored and closed, that it was a seed." Her dry eyes did not leave him. "You are telling me the house of Potter breeds true. I am telling you what I saw." "And what you saw," said Grisla, "you did not decide to keep to yourself and forget, as a wiser goblin might have done, for the world above is a briar patch, and this child sits in the thorniest part of it, orphaned and famous and watched by powers we would sooner not wake. You have come to me instead out of your season with your dust and your word, because you mean to bring it before the council. You mean to ask the 12 to weigh a wizard child." She let that sit. "Do you know when the council last named a wizard friend of the deep, Grenduk? No living goblin knows. It is not in the memory. It is only in the ledger. It is in this ledger." Grisla laid 2 fingers on the beat silver cover of the book before her, and the metal took the warmth of her touch and held it, glowing faintly, and the deep script upon the cover moved and settled. 9 names, in 3,000 years, 9 wizards. I have kept them since I took this office, and before me they were kept, and not one of the 9 was named lightly, and not one of the 9 was named for less than the whole nation's need. It is not a gift, this naming. Wizards think everything a goblin does is a service they may buy. This is not a service. It is a reckoning. When the nation names a wizard friend of the deep, the nation binds itself. It swears the blood reckoning. It puts the whole weight of the deep, its iron and its law and its old cold magic, between that wizard's line and the world, and it does not take the weight back ever, not for the wizard's death and not for his children's children's death, until the line runs out or breaks faith. 9 times in 3,000 years the nation has judged a wizard worth that. Her eyes held him. "And you would have us judge a 5th. I would have us look," said Grenduk. "That is all I ask this hour, not to name him. To look with the whole eye of the council at what I have seen with one goblin's eye, and to reckon whether I saw true. If the council looks and finds a lucky accident, a child's manners aped from a picture book, I will bow to the finding and keep my season and trouble you no more. But if the council looks and finds what I found, Grisla, then the debt of Iagon Potter is not a closed account. It is a living one, and a living debt unpaid is a stain on the ledger of the nation, and we do not, you and I, suffer stain on the ledger." Grisla looked at him a while longer. Then she did a thing she did not often do. She came down from her lectern, and she crossed the worn stone floor, and she stood before the old ironcaster who had become a keeper of reckonings, and she reached up and touched 2 fingers to his brow, the courtesy of equals, which between those 2 had been rare across 4 centuries and had never once been idle. "I will read the omen stones tonight," she said, "and I will stand beside you before the 12, not because I believe you, old friend. Because I have never known you to be a fool, and a wise goblin does not begin at the wrong end of an account by disbelieving the wisest witness he has." She turned back toward her lectern. "Go and eat and wash the sun off you, and sleep if your bones will let you. The council meets at the next fire turning, and Grenduk," she paused, "say the word aloud before you say it to the 12. Say it here, where only the dead and I will hear it, and see whether it shames you or not. A word that shames a goblin has no business in a council. A word that does not has every business there." Grenduk stood in the deep library among the silver names of the goblin dead, and he said the word aloud, the word he had carried up out of the green cutting like a coal against his chest, the oldest and gravest word his people had for one not born of the stone. "Karuk Nul," he said, "friend of the deep." It did not shame him. It rang in the silence like struck iron, and the ledgers that keep themselves turned their pages, all of them at once, a sound in the dark like a great slow breath, and Grisla at her lectern went very still, and did not tell him what she had heard in it, because some things a lore mistress keeps until the reckoning is ripe. That night when the fire turning had emptied the terraces and the great forges banked their glow to embers, Grisla went alone to the reading floor beneath the ledger of names, where no lamp is ever lit, and she read the omen stones. There are older crafts in the deep than smithing, and the reading of the stones is one, older than gold, older than the wheel, old as the first goblin who noticed that the world would answer a question honestly asked if you had the patience to hear the answer in its own slow tongue. The reading floor is a disk of black basalt sunk into the deeper rock, and set into it in a spiral that has no visible end are the omen stones, 777 of them, each cut from a different vein of the earth and each carrying, the loremaster's hold, one true word of the world's own reckoning of itself. Grisla knelt at the outer turn of the spiral in the perfect dark, for the reading is done not with the eye but with the hand, and she laid her palm flat upon the first stone and asked her question the way the old craft asks it, not in words but in a shape of attention, the whole of the mind narrowed to a single point and held there until the stone consents to warm. She asked of the last potter. She asked whether the seed of Iagon had bred true, or whether her old friend had been fooled by a hungry child's manners into opening a great and dangerous account. And she went round the spiral in the dark, stone by stone, hand by hand. and the stones answered as they always answer obliquely, in weathers and pressures, in the faint warming or cooling of ancient rock under an ancient palm, and it took her the whole of the night. And when she came at last to the innermost stone, the 777th, the one the readers call the deep's own word and touch only when the outer stones have all agreed, she found it warm before her hand reached it. Grisla knelt a long time in the dark with her hand over the last stone and did not touch it. A reader learns caution across 400 years, and the greatest caution is this, that the stone which answers before it is asked is telling you a thing so certain that the world could not wait to say it, and such certainties are rarely comfortable and are never small. When at last she laid her palm upon it, the warmth ran up her arm and into her chest and settled there like a coal that would not cool, and she understood two things at once and kept them both. The first was that the child would keep faith, had kept it, would keep it though it cost him everything, because faith was not a coat he wore but the bone he was built on, and the nation could stake its own name beside his and lose nothing by the wager, that she would say to the council. The second thing the stone told her she did not say to the council, nor to Grenduk, nor to anyone for 4 years, that the keeping of faith with this child would cost the nation dear before it was done, would call down upon the deep the full cold weight of the world above, and that the blood reckoning, once sworn, would be tried in fire, and that the trying would come sooner than any goblin now living wished. She kept it because a lore mistress does not spend a hard truth before its hour, and because the softer truth was true also, and because she had learned, across 400 years of reading, that the world does not offer you the choice of a fate without cost. It offers you only the choice of which cost to pay, and the cost of turning away from the last potter, she had read in the outer stones plainly, was worse. She rose in the dark, her knees stiff, the coal of the reading still warm in her chest, and she went up to sleep an hour before the council, and she told no one what she had kept. The Hall of the 12 Ledgers is the second oldest room in the deep, and it is built to remind a goblin what he is and what he owes. It is round, and it is roofed with a single dome of black stone into which the whole night sky of the world's founding is set in points of white fire, the stars as they stood, the loremasters say, on the night the first goblin struck the first spark from the first stone, and understood that the world could be changed by a made thing. Below the dome run 12 great alcoves, and in each alcove stands a ledger, taller than 3 goblins, bound in iron and worked silver, and each ledger is a domain of the nation's law. The ledger of gold and the ledger of iron, the ledger of names and the ledger of the dead, the ledger of oaths, the ledger of grievances, the ledger of craft, the ledger of waters, the ledger of stars, the ledger of laws, the ledger of blood, and the ledger of the deep itself, which no one but the High Reckoner may open, and which is said to have no last page. Before each ledger sits its master, and in the center of the round, on a seat of plain unworked stone that is deliberately the poorest thing in all that splendor, sits the High Reckoner, who owns nothing and keeps nothing and exists only to balance the 12 against one another, so that no single law of the nation may grow greater than the whole. Ragnarok had been High Reckoner for 90 years, which was long, and he had the stillness that the office grinds into those who last in it, the stillness of a scale at rest. He was not large. High Reckoners were seldom large. The nation had learned to distrust size in its judges. He sat on his poor stone seat with his hands open on his knees and his eyes half-lidded, and he looked, to one who did not know him, like an old goblin dozing, and to one who did know him he looked like what he was, which was the most dangerous mind in the deep held perfectly, restfully still. The 12 were assembled, and the alcoves burned with their fires, and Uldrock of the Ironguard stood at the door in his black harness because no full council sat without the Ironguard to witness its lawfulness, and into that room came Grenduk, keeper of reckonings of the 9th ledger, with Grisla the lore mistress at his shoulder, to lay a wizard child before the law of the Goblin nation. He told it a 3rd time. He had told it plainly to Grisla. He told it plainer still to the 12, stripping it of everything but what could be reckoned, for the council did not weigh feelings, it weighed facts and the debts that facts create. He set out the child's deeds one by one as line items in an account, the staying, the fetched stick, the offered bread, the returned silver. He set out against them honestly the costs and the risks, for a goblin who hides the debit side of a ledger is no goblin at all, that the child was a wizard and wizards break faith, that the child was watched by the old wizard Dumbledore whose blood magic lay upon the house like a net, that the child was, by the reckoning of the wizard world, a thing of importance marked by their late war, and that to reach for him was to reach into the briar. That the nation had prospered 3,000 years precisely by not reaching, by keeping its head down and its vaults shut and letting the tall folk squabble in the sun. He said it all out. Then he set beside it the deep ledger and the debt of Iogan Potter, and he was silent and let the 12 reckon. They reckoned aloud, as is the law, each ledger speaking to its own domain, and it was not gentle, for the council of the reckoning is not a place of gentleness but a place of truth, and the two are often enemies. The Master of Gold spoke first, as gold always does, being the loudest of the 12 and the least wise, though it does not know this about itself. A wizard child, he said, and made the word sour. We have grown fat, reckoners, by keeping the wizard world at arm's length and its gold in our vaults where its owners cannot reach it without our leave. That is the whole of our prosperity. And now the ninth ledger would have us take a wizard child into the deep and set our own name beside his, and stake the goodwill of the ministry on which our charter rests upon the manners of a boy of 5. I have kept the ledger of gold 200 years, and I say it plainly. There is no profit in this and much hazard, and the account closes itself. I vote we honor the deed with a gift, a purse, a courtesy, and send the keeper of reckonings back to his season. You would pay the debt of Iegan Potter with a purse, said Grisla, and did not raise her voice, and the room went colder for it. You would answer the wizard who gave us back our dead when your own predecessor's predecessor could not stop them being melted for coin with coin. Master of Gold, there's not enough gold in the deep to close that account, and you disgrace the ledger you keep by naming a sum. The lore mistress mistakes sentiment for law, said Gold. The Master of Gold mistakes price for worth, said Grisla, which is the one error his office cannot afford and makes daily. The Master of Craft spoke then, and the council listened, for the Master of Craft seldom spoke and never wasted a word, having spent the better part of 1,000 years learning that a thing said poorly is a thing made poorly. He was the oldest smith in the deep, his hands scarred to the wrists with the memory of 100,000 pourings, and he did not look at the council when he spoke but at his own ruined palms as a smith does. I will not reckon the child, he said. That is for blood and for stars and for the deep's own word. But the council has been speaking of a returned coin as a merchant speaks of a returned coin, and I would have it understood before the vote what was returned. That mark was made by the keeper of reckoning's own hand. I have seen it. It carries the doorway of the deep and the true sign beneath, which a smith cuts only into work he would stake his name upon before the founding stars. When a maker sets the true sign, he puts a part of himself into the metal that does not come out again while the metal lasts, and the metal knows its maker after and calls to him, faintly, across any distance, forever. This the tall folk do not believe, and it is true regardless of their believing. Now hear me. A thing that carries the true sign given away and lost is a wound in its maker that does not close. A thing that carries the true sign taken by a thief is a theft that the metal itself remembers and resents. But a thing that carries the true sign, returned freely into the maker's own hand by one who might have kept it, is a healing, reckoners. The one healing there is for that particular wound, and it is so rare that in 1,000 years at the forge I have known it twice. Twice. Whatever else the child is or is not, he did that. He healed a wound in a made thing without knowing the wound was there. I have no vote on wizards. But I will not sit in this hall and hear it called a lucky accident, for I know the difference between an accident and a healing, and so does the metal, and the metal does not lie, having no tongue to lie with. He looked up from his palms at last, and his eyes found Grenduk's across the round. The ninth ledger's silver came home. That is all I have to say, but it is not nothing, and I will not let it be counted as nothing. It went on. The Master of Blood, who keeps the ledger of lineage and inheritance, spoke gravely and at length of the Potter line, tracing it back and back, confirming from his own great book that the child was the true and only heir, the last living drop of a blood the nation had honored for 300 years. And this weighed heavy, for the goblins reckon blood not as the wizards do in purity, which they think a nonsense, but in faith kept across generations, which they think the only nobility there is. The Master of Oaths spoke, coldly and precisely, of what the blood reckoning would bind the nation to, and did not soften it. An oath sworn to a wizard child was an oath that might outlast the nation's convenience by a century, and could not be unsworn, and would be tested, certainly, by the powers above who would not suffer the child their war had made famous to slip their reach. The Master of Grievances, whose whole office is the memory of wrong, recited without feeling the long tally of wizard faithlessness, the treaties broken, the risings betrayed, the promises the tall folk made to goblins and kept only so long as it cost them nothing, and asked the council why this wizard alone of all his faithless kind should be trusted, when trust of wizards had bought the nation nothing across 3,000 years but graves. And to that, when it was his turn, Grenduk answered. Because we do not trust him, said Grenduk. Master of Grievances, you have mistaken what is before the council. I have not asked the 12 to trust a wizard. I have asked the 12 to keep faith with itself. The debt of Iegan Potter is not the child's debt, it is ours. It has stood on our ledger unpaid 300 years, not because the Potters would not let us pay it, but because they never once asked in 300 years for a single nut of it back. Think on that. A wizard house did the nation the greatest service one folk can do another, gave us back our dead and our honor at the cost of its own standing, and then never came, generation upon generation, to collect. That is not the conduct of a folk that keeps its friends for what they yield. That is the conduct of a folk that keeps faith because faith is what one keeps. And now the last of that house sits alone and hungry in a cupboard under a stair, watched by wizards who want him for what he yields, wanted by no one for himself, and by the oldest law of the deep, the law that stands above gold and above grievance both, the law that a debt is a debt until it is paid. We owe that child, not for what he will yield us, for what his blood has already given and never asked returned. I do not ask the council to trust a wizard. I ask the council to be a nation that pays what it owes. If we are not that reckoners, then the wizards are right about us and we are only a strong room with teeth. The hall was silent when he had done. High above in the dome, the stars of the founding burned in their fixed stations, indifferent, patient, and the 12 fires burned in their alcoves, and Ragnarok the High Reckoner, who had not spoken a single word through all of it, opened his half-lidded eyes. The ninth ledger speaks of a debt, Ragnarok said. His voice was quiet and the whole council bent toward it, because a High Reckoner who has been silent a long time is heard the more when he speaks. The Master of Gold speaks of a hazard, both speak truly. This is the difficulty of all real reckonings, that the truths do not cancel. We do owe the House of Potter, and to reach for the child is a hazard that may cost the nation dear, both together. A lesser council would seize on one truth and call the other a lie and go home comfortable. We are not a lesser council, he looked without turning his head at Grenduk, but there is a thing the ninth ledger has told us that neither gold nor grievance has answered, and it is the pin on which the whole account turns. He has told us the child gave back the silver freely, not knowing it could be kept. If that is true, the child has the thing our 9 named friends all had, the thing that cannot be taught and cannot be bought and cannot be faked before the eyes of those who watch for it. He keeps faith when faith costs him and profits him nothing, and does not know he is doing it, because to him it is not a virtue but simply the shape of the world. If that is true, then he is already, in the only way that matters, one of ours, and has been since before we knew his name. And if it is not true, if it was manners aped from a picture book, then he is a wizard child like any other, and we owe his ancestor a courtesy and nothing more. Ragnarok's open hands did not move on his knees. So the account cannot be closed from where we sit. It cannot be reckoned on report, even the report of a witness I trust as I trust the keeper of reckonings. It must be reckoned on the child. We must bring him into the deep, and we must look at him with the whole eye of the nation, and we must set before him, without his knowing he is being set anything, the choices that reveal whether a soul keeps faith. And then we will know. And then and only then will this council speak the word that the ninth ledger has not dared to speak in this room, though I see it sitting behind his teeth. Karuk Nul, said Grisla into the silence, because a lore mistress fears no word. He carried it up out of the sunlit world. I heard it turn the pages of the dead. A stir went through the 12 at that, for the ledgers that keep themselves do not turn for nothing, and the Master of Stars, who had not yet spoken, leaned forward in his alcove, and his eyes were bright. I read the deep sky 3 nights running, said the Master of Stars, since the lore mistress sent me word. The wizards mark this child with a lightning scar and call it the sign of their war. But the sky does not know their war. The sky knows older marks. And 3 nights running, reckoners, the founding stars have stood over the House of Potter as they have not stood over any wizard house in the memory of my ledger. And the doorway sign, the sign the old smiths cut on a made thing to say this is finished and true and belongs where it was made, has hung above the child's dwelling like a lamp. I do not tell the council what it means. That is not the office of stars. We read, we do not decide. But I will not sit silent and let it be said the sky was not asked. He sat back. The sky was asked. The sky answered. Make of the answer what the council will. Ragnarok closed his eyes again. He sat so long in stillness that the fires burned down a quarter in their cressets, and no goblin in that hall stirred or spoke, for the nation had learned across 90 years to let this high reckoner take the time a true reckoning takes. Then this is the finding of the council of the reckoning, Ragnarok said at last, and every ledger opened itself to record it, 12 great covers lifting at once with a sound like the breathing of the deep. The debt of Iagan Potter is judged living, not closed. The child of his blood is judged worthy of the nation's own eye. He shall be brought into the deep lawfully, by the standing our charter gives us over the estate his blood inherits, and not by theft, for we are not thieves and will not begin with the last Potter. He shall be housed as a guest of the nation, and watched, and set the reckonings that reveal a soul, and neither he nor the wizards above shall be told what is weighed, for a test a man knows he is taking is no test of the man, but only of his cunning. Uldrock of the Ironguard shall answer for his safety within the deep with his own name. Grisla the lore mistress shall read the reckonings as they fall and keep the tally true. And the keeper of reckonings of the ninth ledger, who has seen this child with his one eye and will not unsee him, shall stand as the child's sponsor before the law, and shall be the hand that brings him down, and shall answer to this council if the eye of the nation finds less than he has promised. Ragnarok opened his eyes a final time, and they came to rest on Grenduk, and there was in them the ghost of something that was not quite warmth, because high reckoners do not permit themselves warmth, but was warmth's near neighbor. You have opened a great account, keeper of reckonings. Pray to the deep stone that the child can close it, because if he can, we will do a thing this nation has not done in the lifetime of any goblin now breathing. And if he cannot, you will have brought a wizard child into the deep for nothing, and shown him the halls no wizard sees, and we will have the trouble of forgetting him, and the nation does not forget easily. You know this, I know this, said Grenduk. Then it is written, said Ragnarok, and brought his open palm down once upon his knee, which is how a high reckoner strikes a matter into law, having no gavel and needing none, and the 12 ledgers closed themselves upon the finding with a sound like a door shutting in the heart of the world. Far above, where the sun still troubled itself over the roofs of Little Winging, Harry Potter was learning that a secret changes the person who keeps it. He had told no one about the token or the goblin, and the not telling had done something to him. He moved through the week at Privet Drive a fraction differently, and it took Aunt Petunia 3 days to work out what it was and put a name to it, and the name she put to it was Cheek, though it was not cheek. It was that a person who owns one true thing that cannot be taken away from him stands, without meaning to, a little straighter and looks, without meaning to, a little longer at the world, because he is no longer entirely at the world's mercy. He still cooked the bacon and fetched the post and made himself a shadow when Dudley came thundering. But there was a floor under him now that had not been there before, a flat warm oval of it against his breastbone, and he found that from the height of that one small certainty he could look down on the ordinary miseries of the house almost kindly, the way, he thought, you might look at rain from indoors. On the Thursday, Dudley's gang cornered a younger child by the garages, a thin girl from the estate with a library book, and Harry, who as a rule made himself scarce at such times because there was nothing to be done and much to be suffered, found that this time his feet did not carry him away. He walked up instead into the whole of Dudley's attention, and he said in a clear voice that surprised the garages into quiet, "Leave her the book, Dud. It's got a due date. She'll get fined." It was not brave exactly. It was only that owning one true thing had made him unwilling, that afternoon, to pretend he owned nothing at all. He paid for it, of course. He always paid. But the girl kept her book and ran, and at the corner she looked back at Harry with an expression he did not have a name for and did not need one for, and Harry, nursing his arm behind the garages after, found that he minded the arm a great deal less than he had expected to. That night he lay in the cupboard and held the token up in the bar of landing light, and he thought about the goblin among the nettles and about the word friend, and he wondered, in the drifting way of a child on the edge of sleep, whether he had dreamed the whole of it, the silver clouds and the doorway in the mountain and the long gray fingers closing his own around the bread. The token said he had not. The token was warm and real and hummed its note below hearing against his palm, and he closed his hand on it and believed. He did not hear the nation resolved to come for him. He could not have. But something in him, some inheritance older than his years, had begun to keep a watch of its own on the ordinary world, the way a person waits for a knock he has been promised but not given the hour of. And as he fell asleep on the Thursday of that changed week, with the token in his fist and the doorway in the mountain opening again behind his eyes, Harry Potter had, without knowing the shape of the thing he was doing, already begun to pack. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Into the deep. The knock came at Privet Drive on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the green cutting, and it was the wrong kind of knock, and everyone in the house knew it at once. Uncle Vernon's knocks were fists, the postman's was 2 soft raps and a whistle. This was 3 strokes, evenly spaced, unhurried, made by something that expected the door to be answered and would wait, without impatience and without going away, until it was. Aunt Petunia went to the window first, and Harry, at the sink, saw the back of her neck go stiff and heard her say, in a voice pitched low so that Vernon would come and she would not have to explain in front of the child, "Vernon, there's a person at the door." The person was an elderly solicitor in a good dark coat, with a leather case and a silver-topped cane and a pair of half-moon spectacles, and he was, of course, Grenduk, though only Harry knew it, and Harry knew it the instant he came to the kitchen doorway, because he knew the eyes now, dark and measuring, the same in any face. Harry stood at the sink with the tea towel in his hands and said nothing at all, because saying nothing was a tool, and this seemed a moment to keep it very sharp. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley. The old solicitor did not offer his hand. He set his case on the kitchen table without being asked, which in that house was nearly an act of war, and Uncle Vernon swelled and went the color of corned beef and got out, "Now see here," and got no further because the old solicitor had opened the case and laid upon the table a single sheet of heavy paper, cream-colored, sealed at its foot with a disc of red wax pressed with a mark that Harry could not see from where he stood, but that made Aunt Petunia make a small sound in her throat. A sound of recognition, a sound of somebody who had seen such a seal once, long ago, in a childhood she had spent the rest of her life pretending had not happened. "I represent the estate of the late James and Lily Potter," said the old solicitor, "of which the child Harry James Potter is sole heir. There are formalities pertaining to the inheritance that require the heir's presence in person at the offices of the executor over the course of the coming weeks. The estate will, of course, meet all costs. The heir will be returned to this address before the new school term. I require your signature here, Mr. Dursley, and here, Mrs. Dursley, as the child standing guardians, consenting to his temporary release into the executor's care. It is a simple matter. The dark eyes moved once over the kitchen, over the cupboard under the stairs with its little door and its bolt, and came to rest on Vernon with a weight that had nothing solicitorly in it at all. I would advise you to make it simple. What followed took some time because Vernon Dursley did not surrender an advantage, even an advantage he had never wanted, without a fight, and there was bluster about jurisdiction and about not knowing this man from Adam and about ringing the police. But Aunt Petunia had gone very quiet and very white, and when Vernon paused to draw breath, she put her hand flat on the table beside the cream-colored paper and said, in a voice Harry had never heard her use, "Vernon, sign it." And when he stared at her, "It's their sort, do you understand me, their sort. You sign it and you let him go, and you do not make trouble with their sort because you will lose, and I have seen what losing to their sort looks like." She did not look at Harry while she said it. She never looked at Harry when the old world showed through. "Let him go, Vernon, he'll be back for term, just let him go." So Vernon signed, pressing so hard the pen tore the paper, and Aunt Petunia signed after him with a hand that shook, and the old solicitor blotted the signatures and folded the sheet away, and it was done. And Harry Potter was, for the length of a summer, the property of no one but himself in an estate 3 centuries deep. "Fetch your things," Grenduk told him in the solicitor's dry voice, and Harry went to the cupboard and took his things, which were nothing. A boy who owns nothing has nothing to fetch. He came back with his hands empty and the token warm under his shirt and stood in the hall, and Grenduk looked at the empty hands for a moment, and something passed across the old solicitor's face that had no place on a solicitor's face, and he said more quietly, "Then we will find you things. Come, the car is waiting." There was no car. But there was a corner of the road where the shadows fell right, and they walked to it together, the tall, stooped stranger and the child, and Aunt Petunia watched from the window with her arms wrapped around herself, and did not wave, and when Harry looked back at her once he thought, though he could not be sure, that her face was wet. The wards were the last thing Grenduk did on Privet Drive, and Harry did not understand it at the time, only that at the corner the old goblin paused and set his silver-topped cane against the pavement and stood very still, his head tilted, listening to something Harry could not hear. "There is old magic on that house," Grenduk murmured, more to himself than to Harry. "Blood magic, the wizard Dumbledore's work. It is not cruel. It was meant to keep you safe, and it does after its fashion, so long as you name this place your home." The cane lifted. "We will not break it today. Breaking it would tell him, and it is not yet time for him to be told. A guest who goes and returns does not break a home ward, he only stretches it. So we will stretch it, Harry Potter, and be careful, and give the old wizard nothing to feel until the day comes that we choose for him to feel it." The dark eyes came down to Harry. "Do you understand any of that?" "No," said Harry honestly. "Good," said Grenduk. "Neither do the wizards mostly, and they made it. Take my hand. The step is a strange one the first time, and I would not lose the last Potter down a crack in the world on his first morning as my guest." Harry took the long gray hand, and the shadows at the corner deepened and folded, and the world of straight hedges and square curtains thinned like breath on glass and was gone. They came out into noise and color, and Harry stopped dead, because he had never in his life seen anything like it. It was a street, but no street of the world he knew. It ran crooked between buildings that leaned together over it like old people sharing a secret, and every building was a shop, and every shop was mad. A window full of owls, awake in the daytime, blinking. A window full of broomsticks on stands, polished, priced. A window of cauldrons stacked to the ceiling, copper and brass and pewter, and one, at the very top, that steamed gently though nothing was under it. Robed people swept up and down the crooked street, tall folk in pointed hats and pointed shoes, a witch with a live raven on her shoulder, a wizard levitating a tower of parcels before him, a knot of children pressed to the window of a shop that seemed to sell nothing but sweets that moved. And over it all, at the head of the street, above the roofs of everything else, stood a building of white marble, crooked as the rest but grander, with great bronze doors and a set of shallow steps, and carved above the doors in letters Harry could not yet read a word that he would come to know, Gringotts. "This is Diagon Alley," said Grenduk, who had let his solicitor's glamour thin so that only Harry, close beside him, could see the true face beneath it. "The wizard world's high street. They are very proud of it. Do not be too impressed. It is the front room of a house whose back rooms they have never been permitted to see." He steered Harry through the crowd with a hand on his shoulder, and the tall folk parted for the old solicitor without quite seeming to notice they were doing it. "The building at the head of the street they call their bank. It is the one place above the ground that belongs to my people. And beneath it," the hand tightened once, warm through Harry's thin shirt, "beneath it is home. Keep close, and Harry. Whatever you see below, and you are about to see things no wizard child has seen in the memory of the nation, remember what you did in the green, and be only that. Be only what you already are. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is the whole of why you are here." They climbed the shallow steps between the bronze doors, past 2 goblins in scarlet and gold who stood as still as the marble and whose eyes followed Harry and only Harry, and into a hall of white stone and long counters, where 100 goblins sat at high desks writing in 100 great ledgers, weighing gems, stamping documents, telling out coins in gold and silver and bronze with a click and rattle that filled the vast room like rain. It was the marble hall, the one room the wizards were allowed to see, and it was the grandest room Harry had ever stood in, and it was, Grenduk had told him and Harry was about to learn, the shop front of a house whose back rooms went down and down. They did not go to a counter. Grenduk led him to the far end of the hall, to a plain door that no wizard queue ever formed before because no wizard eye ever quite settled on it, and beyond the door a passage. And at the end of the passage the top of a stair cut from living rock, spiraling down into a dark that was not empty but full, breathing, warm, and Harry stood at the head of the black stair with his hand in a goblin's hand and looked down into the country under the world, and did not run because he never ran. And because there was nothing in him that wanted to, they went down a long time. Grenduk let the last of his glamour fall on the stair, so that it was not an old solicitor but an ancient goblin who descended beside Harry, grey-brown and long-fingered and grave, and Harry found he liked him better so because it was the truer face and Harry had a preference, lifelong and unexamined, for true things. The walls of the stair were carved, every span of them, and Grenduk named the carvings as they passed quietly the founding and the first coin in the wars, and when they came to the panel of the lone wizard on the road with the 3 carts behind him under sacking, Grenduk stopped and put 2 fingers to the name cut beneath it and said, "This one you should know, this was your blood, Iagan Potter." He stood in the wizard's road and gave the nation back its honored dead, and it cost him everything the tall folk value, and he did it anyway because it was fair. There is no other wizard's name on all this stair, only his, and now his blood comes down the stair alive again for the first time in 300 years. The dark eyes rested on Harry. "Touch it, it is permitted, it is more than permitted." Harry reached up and laid his own scratched fingers over the cut letters of his ancestor's name, and the stone was cold and old, and under the cold there was something he could not name, a hum below hearing, the same note the token made against his chest, and he understood without being told that he was touching the place where his family and these people had first kept faith with one another, and that he was standing in it now, a link in a chain that ran back into the dark further than he could see. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the moment. He only kept his hand on the name a while and then took it away, and they went on down. And then the stair let them out onto the high gallery, and the deep opened below, and Harry saw it. He had no words for it, being 5, and he did not try to find them, which is perhaps why he saw it more truly than a grown man would have. A grown man would have reached for comparisons, cathedral, canyon, furnace, city, and each comparison would have made the thing a little smaller by naming it. Harry only looked. He looked at the tiers of worked stone falling away below into a red glow at the bottom of the world. He looked at the bridges of black iron thin as thread flung across gulfs of dark, and the goblins crossing them with their lamps, a slow gold weather of moving lights. He looked at the fires burning green and gold and morning blue along the terraces, and the mist that gathered in the impossible height of the roof and fell as a rain that dried to nothing before it reached the floor. He heard from somewhere very far below a long low note in the rock that he felt in his teeth, and did not know it for a dragon turning in its sleep, and thought only that the world had a heartbeat and he was standing inside it. Grenduk watched him look. That was, though Harry never knew it, the first of the reckonings, and Grisla, who had come silently to the gallery to observe, marked it in the tally she had begun to keep. That the child, shown the greatest wonder of the goblin nation, did not grab for it with his eyes or his hands or his greed, did not ask what it was worth or whether he might have some, but stood quiet and let it be large, and honored it by not trying to make it his. There is no test a goblin trusts more than this one, for it cannot be studied for, and the tall folk fail it nearly always, and the child passed it without knowing there was anything to pass, which is the only true way to pass it. "Come," said Grenduk when Harry had looked his fill, which took some time. "You are a guest of the nation now, and a guest is fed and housed before he is anything else. That is a law older than the council. Come and meet the one who will look after you, and mind your manners, and mind them equally to the high and the low, for down here we can tell the difference between a child who is polite to those above him and rude to those beneath, and we think very little of it, and we are watching. Not that you need the warning." The dark eyes creased. "I do not think you have ever in your life known the difference between above and beneath. It is the best thing about you, and you came by it the hard way, and I am sorry for the hardness and glad of the thing it made." The one who would look after him was waiting at the foot of the gallery stair, and his name was Skell, and he was a goblin, and he was, by the reckoning of his own people, young, though he came up only to Harry's shoulder and had a face already lined like a walnut. Goblin children are rare and slow-grown and enormously prized, and Skell was an apprentice of the 9th Ledger, 40 years old and reckoned a stripling, assigned to attend the wizard guest because Grenduk had judged shrewdly that the surest way to read a child's heart is to set another young one beside him and watch how he plays. Skell had not wanted the task. Skell had said with the frankness of the young that he did not see why a stripling of the 9th should be made nursemaid to a wizard cub who would likely be gone by the next fire turning and remembered by no one, and Grenduk had heard him out and then told him to do it anyway, and Skell, who for all his grumbling was ninth ledger to the bone, had done it. "You're small," Skell said to Harry by way of greeting, looking him up and down with open goblin suspicion. "For a wizard, I thought you'd be taller." "They're usually taller, it's the one thing they're good at." "I'm 5, Harry said. "I'll get taller, probably. You're not very tall either." "I'm 40, said Skell with dignity, "and I am exactly as tall as I am meant to be, which is a thing wizards never manage. 40, that's nothing. My grandmother's grandmother remembers the last dragon that came up the deepmost shaft on its own legs. You lot are gone in 80 years, poof, like a struck match. It's why you're always in such a hurry and always making such a mess. No time to do anything properly." He considered Harry a moment longer. "Are you hungry? You look hungry." "Wizards are never hungry, they're too fat and pleased, but you look hungry, like one of us after a bad forge year." "I'm a bit hungry," Harry admitted. "Right," said Skell, and something shifted in the walnut face, some private goblin judgment coming down on the side of the guest, though it would have taken torture to make him admit it. "Come on then, I know where they keep the good bread. Not the guest bread, the real bread, the Ironcaster's bread. It's better, they put the roast onion in it. Keep up, and don't touch anything. Everything down here belongs to somebody, and most of it's older than your whole country, so keep your wizard hands to yourself and you'll do fine." Harry kept his wizard hands to himself and kept up, and so began his first day in the deep, which was also, though he did not know it and Skell did not know it, and only Grisla, drifting silent and unseen along the terraces above with her tally, fully knew it, the first day of his reckoning. They were watching him the whole while, and he never felt watched, because the watchers were the best there have ever been at watching, and because the tests they set him were not tests any child could see, being only the ordinary occasions of a day, arranged. The bread was real, and there was roast onion in it, and Harry ate it sitting on a stone bench outside the Ironcaster's hall with Skell, and when a goblin twice his height and black to the elbows with forge soot came out to fetch his own portion, Harry stood up off the bench, because a grown-up was standing and he had been raised, if you could call it raising, to give a grown-up the seat. The Ironcaster looked at the wizard cub standing to give him room and grunted and did not take the seat, but he brought Harry a second piece of the bread with more onion in it, and did not say why, and went back inside. Grisla marked it. The child stood for a soot-black smith he had never seen and would gain nothing from. There was no one above and no one below in the child, there was only people, and he stood for them. Later, when Skell had been called away to his apprentice duties for an hour, Harry was left to wait in a small side hall where the ninth ledger kept its lesser accounts, and on the table in that hall, forgotten or seeming forgotten, there lay a dish of loose gems, red and green, and one enormous blue stone that threw chips of color on the ceiling when the fire caught it. Harry looked at the gems. Any child would look. He went closer and he looked at the blue stone a long while, because it was beautiful and the light in it moved. And then he put his hands behind his back, because he had been told everything down here belonged to somebody, and beautiful things that belonged to somebody were exactly the things you did not touch, and he stood with his hands behind his back and admired the blue stone from a foot away until Skell came back, and he never once put a finger on the dish. He did not know that Uldrock of the Ironguard stood in the shadow of the doorway the whole hour with his hand near his harness, set there to see what the wizard cub did when he thought no goblin watched him alone with a fortune. Uldrock reported to Grisla that the cub had put his hands behind his back like a soldier ordered to parade rest, and had guarded the gems, in effect from himself, for a whole hour, out of nothing but the memory of being told they were not his. Grisla marked that too, and for the first time allowed herself to believe her old friend Grenduk had not been a fool. There was a test of honesty, though Harry never knew it for one. On the second day, a teller of the marble hall was sent to give Harry his guest allowance, a courtesy the nation extends to those it houses, a purse of coin to spend as he pleased in the guest market of the third terrace, and the teller, following his instruction, counted the coins out wrong, and counted them out wrong in Harry's favor, pushing across the table 12 silver sickles where the tally slip plainly said 7. Harry looked at the slip, which he could not fully read, and at the coins, which he could count, because counting was the thing he had always been able to do, and he counted them again, and then he pushed 5 of the silver coins back across the table. "It says 7, Harry said, tapping the slip. "You gave me 12, 5 of them aren't mine." And when the teller, who had orders to insist, said that the count was surely correct and the extra coins were his to keep, Harry pushed them a further inch across the table and said, with the flat certainty of a child on the one subject where he cannot be argued out of himself, "No, 5 of them aren't mine, it wouldn't be fair. My dad wouldn't leave until the ledger was made honest. Grenduk told me." "Neither will I." The teller took back the 5 coins, and bowed, which tellers do not do to wizard children, and went and told Grisla that the cub had quoted his dead father's honesty at him across the counting table and would not be moved. And Grisla, who was keeping the tally, set down her stylus for a moment and pressed 2 fingers to her own brow, alone in the dark of the library, a courtesy of equals given to no one who could see it. offered to a 5-year-old 3 terraces above who would never know it had been given. The last of the reckonings Harry set himself, and it was the one the council had not thought to arrange, and it turned out to be the one that mattered most because it could not have been arranged, only permitted to happen. On the 4th day he wandered further than Skell had shown him, down a quiet lower terrace where the lamps were fewer and the traffic thin, and he came upon an old goblin sitting alone on a bare stone with his back to a pillar, a goblin so plainly dressed and so still that Harry took him at first for one of the lamp keepers resting between his rounds. His robe was undyed, his hands were folded and empty. He kept no ledger and wore no chain of office and sat on the poorest seat Harry had yet seen in all the Deep, a slab of rough stone that had never been worked at all. Any wizard child and most goblin children would have passed such a figure without a second look, for the Deep taught its young early to read rank in dress and seat and retinue, and this old one had none of the three. Harry stopped because the old goblin looked tired and Harry knew tired, and because it seemed rude to walk past someone without a word in a quiet place where there was no crowd to excuse the silence. "Hello," Harry said. "Are you resting? I won't bother you. I only wanted to say hello so you'd know I wasn't sneaking past." The old goblin turned his head. His eyes were half-lidded and very deep, and they came open a degree at the sight of the wizard cub, and he said in a voice quiet as settling dust, "Sit, if you like. There is room on the stone. It is a poor seat. It does not mind sharing." Harry sat. He took from his pocket the last of the Ironcaster's bread, which he had been saving, and he broke it in two as he had broken the crust in the green and held half across. "You look like you've been sitting a long time," he said. "You should eat something." "It's good bread. There's onion in it." The old goblin looked at the bread. He did not take it at first, as another had not taken it 3 weeks before in a nettle patch above the world. "You would give your bread to a stranger you take for a lamp keeper," he said, "on a terrace where no one of standing would see you do it and gain nothing by the giving." "You looked hungry," said Harry, "and I've got some, that's all it is." "Grenduk says a friend doesn't take the last of a friend's store, but you can share it, that's different. Sharing's allowed. Please, I'd like it better if you had some." The old goblin took the bread. He ate it slowly, and Harry sat beside him on the poor stone and did not fill the quiet with chatter, because the old one seemed to want the quiet, and they watched together the slow drift of the lamps on the bridges far above. And after a while the old goblin asked him, without turning his head, what he thought of the Deep, and Harry said it was the largest and the kindest place he had ever been. And the old goblin asked why kindest, when no one had given him anything. And Harry thought about it honestly and said, "Because nobody's told me to get out of the way, not once. At home somebody tells me to get out of the way about 100 times a day. Down here everybody's busy but nobody minds that I'm here. That's the kindest thing there is, I think, not minding that somebody's there." The old goblin was quiet a long time after that. Then he told Harry he should go and find his friend before the fire turning, and Harry stood and thanked him for the company, and said he hoped his rest did him good, and went, and did not learn until much later, and then only by accident, that the plain old goblin on the poorest seat in the Deep had been Ragnarok, high reckoner of the nation, who owned nothing and kept nothing and sat by ancient office upon the meanest stone in all that splendor, and who had gone down to the quiet terrace not by chance but to set himself, plain and unmarked, in the path of the wizard cub, to learn the one thing the arranged reckonings could not teach him, how the child treated a stranger he believed had nothing to give him. And Ragnarok had learned it. The child had given him his bread and his silence and had called it kindness to be let exist. Ragnarok carried that up to the hall and did not speak of it in council, but he weighed it on the plain scale of his plain office, and it weighed more than gold. The reckoning ran a full week, and Harry lived it as the best week of his short life, and never suspected it for what it was. He learned the terraces and the names of the goblins who worked them, and he used the names, which no wizard did, so that within days there were tellers and ironcasters and lamp-keepers across 3 levels of the Deep who found themselves oddly warmed to be greeted by name by the wizard cub, and warmed further that he remembered which of them liked the roast onion bread and which the plain. He learned to sit still through the slow, patient business of the accounting halls and to ask his questions after in the quiet, so as not to break the concentration of goblins at their reckoning, a courtesy he arrived at on his own by watching Grenduk wince when apprentices interrupted, and Grisla marked that too, the child who learned the shape of another folk's respect by watching and gave it, and asked nothing for the giving. There was the matter of the guest allowance and what he did with what remained of it, which no one had thought to watch and which Skell reported anyway, because Skell had begun, against his own better judgment, to be proud of him. The purse the nation gave its guest was meant to be spent in the guest market of the 3rd terrace, on sweets and toys and the bright useless trinkets the tall folk are known to crave, and the goblins fully expected the wizard cub to spend it that way, greedily and on himself, because that was what wizard children did. Harry went to the guest market twice. The first time he stood a long while at a stall of carved stone animals that moved when you wound them. a badger that trundled and a hare that leapt and a little iron dragon that opened and shut its wings, and he wanted the dragon so plainly that the stall-keeper had already begun to wrap it. And then he asked the price and worked out in his counting head how many pieces of the guest market's honey bread that price would buy, and he put the dragon back gently and apologized to the stall-keeper for the trouble, and bought instead a wedge of the honey bread, which he did not eat. He carried it wrapped all the way up to the copying hall, and he gave it to Skell, who had mentioned once in passing days before that honey bread was the finest thing made in the deep, and that an apprentice of the ninth almost never had the coin for it. Skell stared at the honey bread as though Harry had handed him a bar of the nation's own gold. "You bought this," Skell said, "with your guest coin for me, instead of the dragon. I saw you looking at the dragon, cub, you looked at it like it was your own hatched egg." And Harry said reasonably that he could look at a dragon any day now that he knew where the stall was, but that Skell had said honey bread was the finest thing in the deep and hardly ever got any, and it seemed a poor sort of friend who'd buy a toy for himself when he could buy the finest thing in the deep for a friend who never got it. Skell did not have an answer for that. Skell went away and ate the honey bread in a corner where no one could see his face, and when he came back his eyes were suspiciously bright, and he told Harry gruffly that wizards were fools with money, all of them always had been, and that this one was the worst he had ever heard of, and that he supposed, since somebody had to keep such a fool from being cheated blind, he would just have to stay his friend and mind him. It was in the tongue of the ninth ledger, a declaration, and Harry, though he did not know the tongue, understood it perfectly. And he made a friend, which was the thing the reckoning had most wanted to see, and the thing it could least arrange, because friendship cannot be assigned, only permitted. Skell had come to the task grumbling and ninth ledger dutiful, and had meant to keep the wizard cub at arm's length and be rid of him at the fire turning, and had found to his own considerable disgust that he liked him. He liked that the cub listened. He liked that the cub thought goblin work was the most interesting thing in the world and said so and meant it, where wizard children thought goblins were servants and goblin work was beneath notice. He liked that the cub told a thing was old and precious, went quiet and careful around it instead of grabbing, which was how a goblin child was taught to behave, and how no wizard child had ever behaved in Skell's experience. And on the fifth day, when a knot of older apprentices from the fourth ledger, who thought little of the ninth and less of wizards, cornered Skell on a low bridge and knocked his satchel of tally slips into the gulf below out of pure spite, so that a week of Skell's careful copying went fluttering down into the red dark and was gone, and Skell stood there with his empty satchel and his face working, it was Harry who stepped up onto the bridge into the whole of the older apprentice's attention. The same walk he had walked at the garages, and said, in a clear voice that surprised the bridge into quiet, "That was cruel. He worked all week on those. You should help him do them again. That would be fair." They did not help. They laughed the way Dudley's gang had laughed, and one of them shoved Harry so that he sat down hard on the iron of the bridge and scraped his palm. But Uldrock of the Iron Guard was on the bridge before the echo of the shove had died, having been near, as he was always near now, and the fourth ledger apprentices found themselves explaining to the captain of the Iron Guard why the guest of the nation was sitting on the ground with a bleeding hand, and the explaining did not go well for them, and they spent the next fire-turning recopying not only Skell's ruined slips but a good deal of their own besides under Uldrock's eye. But that was not what mattered. What mattered was what Harry did next, which was to get up off the iron and cross to Skell and put his scraped hand on the goblin's shoulder and say, "It's all right. We'll do them again together. I'm good at copying. I'm good at anything with counting in it." And Skell, 40 years old and reckoned a stripling and mortified past bearing to have needed rescuing by a wizard cub of 5, looked at the hand on his shoulder, which was bleeding a little, bleeding for his sake, and did the thing that settled the whole reckoning past any further argument. He reached up and put his own long-fingered hand over Harry's, goblin over wizard, the way the nation clasps to seal a debt of the heart, and he said, gruffly, so that no one would think he meant it as much as he meant it, "Together, then. And I'll show you the good ink, not the guest ink, the real ink." Grisla, in the shadow of the terrace above, closed her tally at that because there was nothing left to reckon. She went that hour to the Hall of the 12 Ledgers, where Ragnarok sat on his poor stone seat, and Grenduk waited by the ninth alcove with the particular stillness of a goblin trying very hard not to hope, and she laid her tally before the high reckoner and said only what a lore mistress says when the reckoning is complete and the finding is not in doubt. "He keeps faith," Grisla said, "when it costs him and profits him nothing, and he does not know he is doing it, because to him it is not a virtue but the shape of the world. He stood for a smith he will never see again. He guarded a fortune from himself for an hour in an empty room. He gave back 5 coins that were his for the taking, and quoted his dead father at the teller who tried to make him keep them. And when another young one was wronged before him, he put his own blood on the iron to make it right and asked nothing, and the young one clasped his hand to seal it, which no goblin does lightly and no goblin of the ninth does at all unless the thing is true. The account is closed, high reckoner. It closes in the child's favor. He is what the ninth ledger promised and more, for the ninth ledger promised honor and did not think to promise warmth, and the child has both. She set the tally in Ragnar's open hand. The seed of Iegan bred true, name him. Ragnar held the tally a while and did not open it because he trusted the one who had kept it, and around the round the 12 fires burned in their alcoves and the founding star stood fixed in the black dome overhead, and far below the world kept its slow red heartbeat going in the dark. Then it is time, said Ragnar, for the nation to do a thing it has not done in the life of any goblin now breathing. He looked at Grenduk and there was the ghost again in his eyes of warmth's near neighbor. Keeper of reckonings, go and tell the child's sponsor that his sponsorship is vindicated. And then go and tell the child, not the whole of it is for the hall, and the words are not ours to spend before their hour. Tell him only that the nation has looked at him with its whole eye and found him a friend, and means to say so in 3 days' time in the old way before the 12 and the founding stars and the assembled deep. Tell him to sleep and eat and be only what he is, and Grenduk, the high reckoner's open hand closed once upon the tally. Tell him welcome, he has been a great while without the word, let ours be the mouths that give it back to him. And Grenduk, old Ironcaster, keeper of reckonings of the ninth ledger, who had fallen in a nettle patch expecting to die and had been saved instead by a child who did not run, went up through the terraces of the deep to find that child, and found him on a stone bench outside the ninth ledger's copying hall with his tongue between his teeth and a borrowed pen in his scratched hand, laboriously and happily recopying a ruined tally slip beside a goblin stripling who was pretending not to watch him do it. And Grenduk stood in the warm gold light of the morning fires and the forge glow, and looked at the 2 young heads bent together over the honest work, and found that he did not want to interrupt them, not yet, not for one more moment, and so he did not. He only stood and watched and let the moment be large and honored it by not trying to make it his. And behind him, unseen, Grisla the lore mistress stood and watched him watching, and marked in the private tally she kept and showed to no one, that the child had done a thing the whole council had failed to reckon, which was to give the oldest and loneliest goblin in the deep something to be gentle about, at the very end of a long hard life, when the old one had thought all his gentleness spent. And she thought that this, perhaps, more than the coins or the courtesy or the blood of Iegan, was the true reckoning, and the one the founding stars had answered, 3 nights running, over an ordinary house in the sunlit world. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Friend of the Deep, they gave Harry 3 days, and on the first of them Grenduk came to the guest cell where the wizard cub slept and sat down on the end of the cot and told him, as plainly as such a thing can be told to a child of 5, what the nation meant to do. In 3 days' turning, Grenduk said, the whole of the deep will gather in the hall of the 12 ledgers, which no wizard has entered since your ancestor stood in it, and there, before the founding stars and the assembled nation, the council of the reckoning will name you Karuk Nul. It means friend of the deep. In 3,000 years my people have said it of 9 wizards, you will be the 10th. The dark eyes rested on Harry, steady and unhurried, giving him room to be afraid if he needed to be. It is not a small thing, it is the largest thing my people do, and because it is large, you are owed the truth of it before you stand up in front of it, so that when you say yes, you are saying yes to what is true and not to what is pretty. Will you hear the truth of it? Harry sat up on the cot and drew his knees to his chest and wrapped his arms around them and said, yes. So Grenduk told him the truth of it, and the truth of it was this. It was not, Grenduk said, a gift, though the wizards would call it one, because wizards thought everything a goblin did was a service they had somehow earned. It was a reckoning. It was 2 debts balanced and set into iron. On the nation's side, the nation would swear the blood reckoning. It would put the whole weight of the deep, its law and its iron and its old cold magic, between Harry and his line and any power in the world that reached for them to do them harm, and it would not take that weight back ever, not for Harry's death and not for his children's children's death, until his line ran out or broke faith. That was the nation's half. And Harry's half was not gold, because a friend is not a customer, and it was not service, because a friend is not a servant, and the goblins were no one's servants and would break the oath sooner than pretend to be. Harry's half was faith. He would be bound from the day of the naming to the day of his death to keep faith with the deep, to never betray a goblin trust, to never take what a goblin had made without the maker's leave, to never lie to the nation in a matter of reckoning, and to hold the honor of the deep as he held his own in the sunlit world where the tall folk would despise him for it as his ancestor had been despised. It would cost him. Keeping faith with goblins always cost a wizard something up in the world above. It had cost Iegan his standing and his ease and the good opinion of his own kind, and Iegan had paid it, and Harry, if he said yes, would pay it too, in coin he could not yet imagine. So it is not a thing given to you, Grenduk finished. It is a thing you carry. It is heavy, and it does not get lighter, and you may set it down at any time by breaking faith, and if you break faith the oath ends, and the nation owes you nothing and remembers you as it remembers the faithless, which is to say forever and coldly. That is the truth of it. I have told you all of it, the weight and the cost and the way it can go wrong, because you gave a stranger the last of your bread and your dead father's honesty across a counting table, and a folk does not answer honesty with a pretty half of the truth. Now you know what is asked. In 3 days you will be asked it again in the old words before the nation, and you will answer for yourself, because no one may answer such a question for another, not your sponsor, and not the High Reckoner, and not the founding stars. Only you. He rose from the cot. You have 3 days to think as hard as you have ever thought, and Harry, he paused at the door. There is no shame in saying no. 2 of the 9 we offered it to said no. We honored them for it, and they went their way, and the offer was not made twice. You may be the third. I would not think one grain the less of you. Do you understand me? Yes, Harry said, and then, because it was true and because he did not want to leave it unsaid 3 whole days, but I won't say no. Grenduk stood in the doorway. You have had 3 breaths to consider a thing that will bind you until you die. Do not answer me now. Answer me in 3 days in the hall. I'll answer the same in the hall, Harry said. I'll think about it as hard as I can for 3 days, I promise, but I already know because it's not really a hard question once you say it out. You're asking me to keep faith with people who kept faith with me. That's the whole of it, isn't it? Keep faith with people who kept faith with me. I don't have to think 3 days about that. I'd have said yes to that in the green if you'd asked me before I knew there was any weight in it at all. Grenduk did not answer for a while. When he did, his voice had gone rough at its edge, the roughness of an old goblin discovering at the very end of a long life a thing he had not expected to find. Think anyway, he said, for me. Humor an old goblin who has waited 300 years for this and would like it done properly. Think for 3 days and eat and sleep and let Skell show you the good ink, and then say your yes in the hall where it counts. And he went out, and in the passage outside the guest cell, where the wizard cub could not see him, he stood a moment with one long hand flat against the cold stone of the wall, and did not move until the roughness had passed out of his throat and it was safe to be seen again. Harry thought for 3 days because he had promised, and a promise was a thing you kept even when the keeping was only for your own sake. He thought hardest on the stair. Skell took him up the great processional stair on the first day, all the way to the panel of the lone wizard on the road with the 3 carts behind him under sacking, and left him there an hour, because Skell had a goblin's instinct for when a friend needed to think beside the thing he was thinking about. Harry sat on the cold step below his ancestor's name and looked at the carved wizard holding his warrant over his head, and he tried to imagine being that man, riding down into a broken country to give back a dead folks dead when his own kind had told him it was theirs to melt, and he tried to imagine what it had cost, the standing lost, the friends fallen away, the whole warm ordinary world of his own people turning cold to him because he had chosen fairness over gold. Grenduk had said the cost would come to Harry too. Harry believed him because Grenduk did not tell pretty halves of the truth. He sat and he thought about the cost, honestly, the way a person tests the ice on a pond before he trusts his weight to it, and he found, testing, that the ice held. He did not know yet all the shapes the cost would take. But he knew this much, sitting on the stair below Iagon's name, that up in the sunlit world he had already been despised for years for nothing, for no reason he had ever been given, and that if he was going to be despised regardless, he would very much rather be despised for keeping faith with people who had kept faith with him than for being a boy in a cupboard who had done nothing wrong. If the cost was the same either way, and it seemed it might be, then the naming was not a cost at all. It was only finally a reason. He put 2 fingers to Iagon's name the way Grenduk did, and he said quietly to a man 300 years dead, I think I'd have liked you, I think you'd have said yes too, and he went down to find Skell. Skell showed him the good ink on the 2nd day, as promised, in the copying hall of the 9th, and it turned out the good ink was a thing worth making a promise about, a deep blue-black drawn from a mineral found only in the lowest galleries, that went onto the silver page cold and dried warm and held its line for 1,000 years without fading. Skell let Harry write his own name in it, both his names, the tall folk one and the one he did not yet officially have, and Harry wrote Karuk Nul in the good ink in his careful 5-year-old hand, and Skell looked at it a long moment and then gruffly cut the little square of silver from the practice sheet with an apprentice's shears and gave it to Harry to keep, which was, though neither of them said so, the 2nd gift Skell had ever given anyone in his 40 grudging years. The first having been the clasp on the iron bridge. You could still say no, Skell said, not looking at him, cleaning the good pen with more care than the good pen needed. Grenduk told you that. 2 of them said no. You could be a third and go back up to the sun and be a normal wizard and forget all about us down here in the dark, cheating your kind for gold, which is what they all think we do, and you'd never have to pay the cost he warned you about, and nobody would think the worse of you. He set the pen down. I'm only saying, so you know I'm not, leaning on you. It's your yes. It has to be your yes. Harry looked at the little square of silver with his name in the good ink. Do you want me to say no? He asked. No, said Skell with the frankness of the young before he could stop himself, and then mortified, but that's not the point, cub. The point is it's your. And Harry, who understood him perfectly, said, it's my yes, and it's yes. And it was going to be yes before you gave me the silver, so you don't have to feel bad about leaning. You didn't lane, I'd already fallen over. And Skell made a sound that in a wizard would have been a laugh and in a goblin was something drier and older, and told Harry he was a fool with money and a fool with words and the worst wizard he had ever heard of, and that he supposed that settled it, and went back to cleaning the pen so that his face would have somewhere to be. On the third day before Grissla came with the robe, Harry went down to the founding halls, to the forge of the Master of Craft, because he had heard that the Master was making him something, and it did not seem right to let a thing be made for him, and never once thank the hand that made it. The Master of Craft did not stop his work when the wizard cub came in, for a pouring cannot be stopped, and Harry knew better now than to speak into a goblin's concentration, so he stood at the edge of the forge light and watched, and the watching was itself a wonder. The old smith bent over his mold, his scarred hands steady as stone, drawing a thread of something that ran silver and ran iron both at once, wetting the two metals in a way that Grissla had said only 3 smiths living could do, and writing into the thread as it cooled the deep script of a name. Harry watched the whole of it in silence, and when at last the master straightened and the thread lay finished and gleaming on the black bench, Harry said only, "Thank you for making it. I'll try to be worth the trouble." And the Master of Craft, who had watched the child Silver come home and had reckoned it a healing, looked at the wizard cub standing quiet and grateful at the edge of his forge, and said, in the voice of a goblin who did not waste words, "You are already worth the trouble. The trouble is how I say so. A smith says what he means in metal. Where the metal, cub and you will be wearing what I could not say. That is thanks enough and more than most get." And he turned back to his forge, which was, from the Master of Craft, an embrace. They clothed him on the third day, because a guest may go in guest cloth, but one who is to be named before the nation may not, and it was not fitting that the last potter stand up in a dead cousin's cast-offs to be made friend of the deep. Grissla saw to it herself, which surprised the whole ninth ledger, for the lore mistress did not trouble herself with cloth. She came to the guest cell with a bundle wrapped in dark linen, and she unwrapped it on the cot, and inside was a robe such as Harry had never seen, deep gray shot through with a thread that was not silver and not iron but the marriage of the two, so that when it moved the gray moved with a color under it like the weather in the reckoning mark, and at its collar and its cuffs ran a line of the deep script, cut, Grissla said, not embroidered, worked into the very weave by a loom that wrote as it wove. "It is plain," Grissla said, holding it up against him to measure the fall of it, "and you will think it is not much, being a child and used to the tall folks' love of God. It is worth more than the tall folks' high street entire. The thread is drawn from the deep silver and the deep iron both, wetted in the forge, which cannot be done by any smith living but 3, and one of the 3 has spent a day and a night on this cloth and grudged you not an hour of it, and will grudge you nothing ever again, because he is the Master of Craft and he watched your silver come home." She turned the collar so he could see the script. "This says your name, not the name the tall folk gave you, the name the nation gives you tonight. It is written already in the weave 3 days before the naming, because Grissla the lore mistress does not doubt a reckoning she has read to the innermost stone, and does not wait upon a ceremony to know what is true." Her dry old eyes came up to his. "Hold still, you have grown this week. You came down a shadow and you have put on flesh and stood straighter every day, and I have had to let out the seam twice, and I am not sorry for the trouble. It is the first work of the deep I have done in 400 years that was for a living thing that would grow into it, and not a name cut for one who has stopped. Hold still, Karuk Nul, let me dress you for the hall." And she dressed him, the oldest keeper of the Goblin dead, in the first thing that had ever been made in all the world for Harry Potter alone, measured to his own body and written with his own true name. And Harry stood very still and let her, and did not trust himself to speak, and Grissla, who missed nothing, saw the not speaking and understood it, and was kind enough to fill the silence with talk of seams so that the child would not have to. The Hall of the 12 Ledgers on the night of a naming is a thing that the tongue of wizards cannot hold, and this account will not pretend otherwise, and will only set down what Harry saw as he saw it, and let the reader make of it what the reader can. He came to it down the great processional stair between Grenduk and Grissla, with Skell walking behind in his best apprentice harness, scrubbed and bristling with something he would have dyed before naming, and Uldrock of the Iron Guard before them in his black war harness with the captains of the guard at his back. And at the foot of the stair the doors of the hall stood open, doors of black iron 3 goblins high, worked over every span with the whole history of the nation, and beyond them was light. The descent of those doors was itself a thing Harry would carry the rest of his life. All down the great processional stair the nation had set its lamps, one to step, thousands of them, so that the spiral of the descent burned like a coil of fallen stars, and at the turn of every landing stood a keeper of one of the lesser crafts, the lamp keepers and the water wardens and the tenders of the morning fires, each holding up a light of a different color as the small procession passed, green for the living and gold for the making, and the deep blue that goblins burn for the honored dead. So that Harry walked down through a slow rain of colored light with the whole working nation lifting its lamps to him, not because he was above them, for he was not, but because he was one of them now, and the deep lights its own home when one of its own comes down the stair to be named. The air grew warmer and richer as they descended, and it carried the smell of the forge fires and the deep bread, and under everything, the faint, clean smell of the worked silver, which Harry had come to know and would ever after mean to him safety. And beneath his feet, through the stone of every step, the low note of the deep rose steady and vast, the deep heartbeat of the world under the world, keeping time with the quick beat in his own chest until he could no longer tell which was which, and stopped trying and let them beat together. The nation had gathered. Harry had not known there were so many goblins in the world. They filled the round of the hall from the floor to the high galleries, tier upon tier of them rising into the dark, thousands, and the fires burned in the 12 alcoves green and gold and morning blue. And above them all the dome of black stone held the founding stars, the whole sky of the world's first morning set in white fire into the rock. And the stars were brighter than Harry had yet seen them, brighter, Grisla murmured at his shoulder, than they had burned in the memory of any goblin living. For the sky knew what was toward, and the sky, unlike the tall folk, did not pretend indifference to things that mattered. The 12 ledgers stood open in their alcoves, each taller than 3 goblins, and before each sat its master, and in the center of the round, on his poor unworked stone, sat Ragnarok the High Reckoner, plain and small and still, the plainest thing in all that splendor which was the point of him, and had always been the point of him. They brought Harry to the center of the round, to a disk of pale stone set into the dark floor beneath the very center of the dome, where the light of the founding stars fell straight down and pooled, and there they left him alone, a child of 5 in a robe gray as weather, standing in a circle of ancient light with the whole of the goblin nation risen silent around him. And it was the largest and the loneliest Harry had ever felt, and he did not run, and he did not look for the door. Because there was a warmth against his breastbone that no sighs and no silence could touch, and because he had thought about it for 3 days as hard as he had ever thought about anything, and he knew his answer. Grisla the lore-mistress came forward to the edge of the light, and she carried the great ledger of names, and she set it upon a lectern of black iron at the rim of the disk, and she opened it, and the deep script within moved and settled, and she read the deeds. She read them into the ledger and into the hearing of the assembled nation, plainly, in order, the way a reckoning must be read, how the child had not run from a fallen stranger in the sunlit world, how he had torn his own hand fetching the stranger's stick and thought nothing of the tearing, how he had offered the last of his bread. How he had taken up goblin silver worked with the doorway of the deep, the most takeable treasure his eyes had ever fallen on, and had weighed it one breath in his hand and given it back freely, taking nothing, not knowing it could be kept. She read the reckonings of the week below, the smith he had stood for, the fortune he had guarded from himself, the 5 coins he had pushed back across the counting table with his dead father's honesty in his mouth, the honey bread he had bought for a friend instead of the dragon he wanted, the bread and the silence he had given on a poor stone on a quiet terrace to a plain old goblin he took for a lamp keeper and who was the high reckoner of the nation. She read it all into the ledger of names, and when she had done, the assembled nation, thousands of goblins in the tiers rising into the dark, spoke together the word the nation speaks when a reckoning is heard and found true, a single word in the old tongue, low and vast, and the sound of it ran round the hall and up into the dome and came back changed. And Harry felt it in the pale stone under his feet and in the bones of his own small body, the whole nation saying at once in effect, "Heard and true and reckoned." Then Ragnarok the High Reckoner rose from his poor stone, and the hall went so silent that Harry could hear the fires. "Harry Potter," said Ragnarok, and his quiet voice carried to the highest gallery, because a hall built by goblins carries what the High Reckoner says and swallows what he does not. "You stand where one wizard has stood before you in 300 years and 9 in 3,000. You have been read into the ledger of names, and the nation has found the reckoning true. Now the nation asks you in the old words, and you will answer for yourself, for no one may answer this for another." He came to the edge of the light, and he looked down at the child in the circle of stars, and his half-lidded eyes were fully open now, and there was nothing sleepy in them at all. "Will you keep faith with the deep? Will you hold a goblin's trust unbroken, and a goblin's making unstolen, and the honor of the nation as your own, in the world above and the world below, in the light and in the dark, though it cost you your ease and your standing and the good opinion of your own kind, from this night until the night you die? Answer, Karuk Nul. The nation is listening. It will not forget your answer, whichever it is. It never forgets anything. Choose your word and say it plain." Harry looked up. The founding stars fell white and cold and ancient into the circle where he stood, and around him rose the whole silent weight of a nation 3,000 years old, and at the rim of the light stood the faces he had come to know: Grisla, dry-eyed and still; Uldrak, grim and watchful in his black harness; Skell, 40 years old and reckoned a stripling, gripping his own hands to keep them still; and Grenduk, old ironcaster, keeper of reckonings, who had fallen in a nettle patch expecting to die and had found instead a child who did not run, watching now with a stillness that cost him everything he had. "I will," Harry said, His voice was a child's voice, and it should have been swallowed in that vastness, and it was not, because the hall carried it, lifted it, ran it round the round and up into the dome, and the founding stars at the sound of it blazed. It began in the dome, and it came down. The white stars brightened until the whole sky of the world's first morning burned overhead like a struck forge, and then their light poured down the walls of the hall, down the tiers of goblins, into the 12 open ledgers which took the light and gave it back doubled, 12 columns of it rising from the 12 great books to meet the starfall halfway, and where they met, above the center of the round, above Harry's upturned face, the light gathered and turned, slow and vast, into the shape that was cut on the reckoning mark and woven into his collar and set in the deep sky over Privet Drive 3 nights running. The doorway in the mountain, the true sign, the sign the old smiths cut on a made thing to say this is finished and true and belongs where it was made. And the hall filled with a sound that was not the fires and was not the nation, a low note below hearing, felt in the teeth and the breastbone, the same note the token had made against Harry's chest every night since the green, but grown now to fill a country under the world, the deep stone itself waking and answering, iron and blood, and the old cold magic of the deep rising all at once to seal what the child had sworn. Ragnarok lifted his open hand into the falling light, and he spoke the oath of the nation, and as he spoke it, the whole assembled deep spoke it with him. Thousands of voices become one voice, and the one voice was so vast and so quiet at once that Harry understood he was hearing a thing that had been said only 9 times since the founding of the world. The nation of the deep swears the blood reckoning, said Ragnarok, and the nation said it with him, and the dome rang. To Harry Potter, called Karuk Nul, friend of the deep, and to his line and his blood after him, we swear the whole weight of the deep. Our law shall be his law, our iron shall be his shield. Our old magic shall stand between his blood and any power that reaches for it to do it harm, in the light and in the dark, above the ground and below it, and we shall not take back the weight we set this night, not for his death, not for the death of his children's children, not for 1,000 years, until his line runs out or breaks faith. This we swear on the founding stars, and on the deep stone, and on the ledger of names that forgets nothing. Let it be written, let it be iron, let it be so. And it was written, and it was iron, and it was so. The light did not fade so much as it settled, drawing down out of the dome and the columns and the 12 ledgers, gathering all of it into the circle where Harry stood, and into one point within the circle, which was the token at his breast, the dull worn oval of silver on its dark cord that Grenduk had hung round his neck in the green 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. Harry felt it grow warm, warmer than it had ever been, warm as a coal, warm as a hand, and he drew it out from his collar and held it up, and it was not dull any longer. The starlight had gone into it. The doorway in the mountain stood cut deep and clear upon its face now, and beneath the doorway, where before there had been nothing, there was the true sign, the Maker's mark. This is finished and true and belongs where it was made. And around the rim ran a line of the deep script that had not been there before, and it was Harry's name, his true name, Karuk Nul, written by the light of the founding stars into goblin silver in the moment of his naming. Grenduk came to him across the circle of light, and knelt, which an old goblin's knees do not love, and which no goblin does before a wizard. And he took the token in his own long hand where it hung at the child's breast, and turned it once so the true sign caught the starlight, and said quietly, so that only Harry heard it under the great settling hum of the deep, I made this the day you were born, and I have carried it 5 years against the chance that the blood of Iagon had bred true. And tonight it is finished. It was never finished until now. It was waiting for its true sign, and it could not have its true sign until it had a name to bear, and it could not have a name until you earned one, and you have earned one, Karuk Nul. It is the truest thing I have made in 300 years at the forge, and it is yours, and it is mine, for the Maker owns the made thing forever, and so we will both of us hold it always, you and I, which is the whole of what the word friend has ever meant. He closed Harry's fingers over the warm silver, goblin hand over wizard hand, the clasp that seals a debt of the heart, the same clasp Skell had given him on the iron bridge. Welcome to the deep, friend of the deep. You have been a great while without the word. It is ours to give back to you now, and we give it freely, taking nothing, which is the only way the largest things are ever given. Welcome. Harry looked at the old goblin kneeling before him in the falling starlight, and at the faces beyond him, Grisla and Uldrock and Skell and the thousands rising into the dark, all of them silent now, all of them watching, all of them in the strange, enormous fact of it, his, and he did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the moment. And he did the only thing that was large enough, which was to step forward and put his arms around the old goblin's neck, the way a child puts its arms around the neck of the one it has decided, past all argument, to belong to and hold on. The Hall of the 12 Ledgers had seen the swearing of the blood reckoning 9 times in 3,000 years. It had never once seen the 10th friend of the deep, a child of 5 in a robe gray as weather, throw his arms around the neck of his sponsor and hold on as though he had found at the bottom of the world the thing he had been looking for his whole short life and had stopped believing was anywhere to be found. The nation watched it in silence. And then from somewhere in the high tiers, one old goblin struck his palm against the stone, once the way the nation marks a matter into truth, and another took it up, and another, and it ran round the hall and up into the galleries, and filled the country under the world with a sound like the deep heart of the earth beating, thousands of goblin hands striking the ancient stone in the oldest applause there is. For a small wizard and an old smith holding on to one another in a circle of the light of the world's first morning, while the founding stars burned overhead in the ledger of names which forgets nothing, wrote the 10th name into the roll of the friends of the deep and closed upon it and kept it forever. There was a feast after, because there is always a feast after, even among goblins, who do not do such things lightly and therefore do them, when they do them at all, better than anyone. The nation kept it on the second terrace in the founding halls, with the forge fires banked to a glow, and the long iron tables set out and heaped with the food of the deep, the dark bread and the roast root and the deep mushrooms, and the honey bread that Skell had thought the finest thing in the world, and now, seeing the tables, revised upward. Harry sat between Grenduk and Skell at the head of the longest table, in his robe grey as weather, with his true name at the collar and his true name at his breast, and goblins came to him all night, quietly in ones and twos, not to bow, for the nation did not bow to friends any more than to servants, but to touch two fingers to their own brows in the courtesy of equals, and to say his name, his real name, and to hear him say theirs back, which he did every time. Because he had learned their names in the week below and had not forgotten one. Uldruk of the Ironguard came late when the fires were low, and stood over the child a while in his black harness, grim and enormous, and then he unfastened from his own wrist a band of plain black iron, worn smooth by long wearing, and set it on the table before Harry without a word. Ironguard iron, Grenduk murmured, when Uldruk had gone back to his post. He has worn that 400 years. It is not a gift a captain gives. It is a captain telling you that the iron of the deep will stand between you and the dark, and that he, personally, is the iron. He will not say it. He has said it. Keep the band. Harry kept the band. Gristla came to him once near the middle of the night, and she did not sit, and she did not touch her brow, and she set before him instead a thing wrapped in the dark linen she favored, and when Harry unwrapped it there was a book inside, small and worn, bound in ordinary brown leather, the plainest object on all the heaped iron tables, and out of place among the silver and the deep, bred as a sparrow among ravens. "This is not of the deep," Gristla said. "It came to us with your father's accounts, to be kept until his heir could hold it, and I have kept it 11 years in the ledger's own vault, and tonight you are its heir grown enough to hold it, so I give it to you out of season, because I am old and I make my own seasons now." Harry opened the brown book. The hand inside was not the deep script. It was ordinary ink in an ordinary hand, two hands, in fact, one round and one slanting, and there were dates, and there were here and there small drawings, and pressed between two of the pages a dry flat flower that had once been alive. "It is your mother's book and your father's," said Gristla. "The tall folk call such a thing a commonplace book. They kept it together before you and after you a little while, and then it stopped, as things stopped that autumn. I have not read it. It was not mine to read. It is yours. When you are older and can read the ordinary hand, you will meet them in it a little, not the whole of them, a little. It is more than most orphans get and less than you are owed, and it is what there is." She wrapped it again in the linen and put it into his hands. "Keep it with the token and the silver and the iron. It is the last of them and the first of you, and tonight you are old enough at last to be trusted with both." And she was gone before Harry could find any of the words, which was a mercy, and which she had intended. Ragnarok did not come to the feast, for a high reckoner does not feast, owning nothing and keeping nothing and standing always a little apart so that the scale of him may stay level. But near the end of the night, when Harry's eyes had begun to lose the fight they had been quietly losing for an hour, a plain old goblin in an undyed robe appeared at the edge of the forge light, on no seat and no state, and Harry got up and went to him, because you did not let a tired-looking old person stand alone at the edge of a party, whoever he turned out to be. And this one had turned out to be the High Reckoner of the nation, and Harry knew it now and went to him anyway, and for the same reason. "You gave me your bread," Ragnarok said, "when you took me for a lamp keeper and called it kindness to be let exist." His half-lidded eyes rested on the child. "I have kept the scale of this nation 90 years, Karuk Nul, and balanced gold against grievance and blood against law until my own name is a thing I have half forgotten, and I will tell you the one reckoning I have never been able to make come out even, which is this. Why it is that the tall folk who have so much guard it so hard, and a child who has nothing gives away the last of his bread and calls it kindness merely to be permitted to exist. I have no answer. I have looked for it 90 years. But tonight the nation swore its whole weight to your blood, and I find, weighing it on the plain scale of my plain office, that I am content, which is a thing a high reckoner is not permitted, and I permit myself this once because the account is good. Go and sleep, friend of my nation. You are guarded now. You have been a great while unguarded. Let the deep keep the watch tonight. It does not tire, and it does not forget, and it will not let go." They carried him to bed before the feast was done, because 5-year-olds do not last the length of a goblin feast, name or no name, and it was Grenduk who carried him. the old ironcaster bearing the sleeping child through the warm gold halls of the deep with the small head on his shoulder and the small fist closed, even in sleep, around the finished token at his breast. And Skell walked beside them the whole way, carrying the little square of silver with the name in the good ink and the band of Ironguard iron, the whole small treasury of a child who had owned nothing a month before and now owned the sworn faith of a nation 3,000 years old. And Grisla stood in the door of the ledger of names as they passed and watched them go by, and did not mark it in any tally, because some things a lore mistress keeps not in the ledger but in the one place the ledger cannot reach, which even the oldest of them are surprised at the very end to find they still have. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. What the deep opens. The Potter vault was very old and very far down, and Grenduk took Harry to it himself 3 days after the naming in a cart. The cart was the one thing in the deep that Harry never made his peace with, and he was not ashamed of that, because Grenduk had taught him that a mind which does not flinch from a goblin mine cart on the rails of the deep galleries is a mind that has measured the cart wrong. It ran on iron tracks that flung themselves out over gulfs of black air, and dived through tunnels barely wider than the cart and swung round curves banked so hard that the world tilted on its side. And it did all of this at a speed that pressed Harry back into the seat and pulled the breath sideways out of him. And Grenduk sat beside him through the whole of it with one long hand fisted in the back of Harry's grey robe, not because the cart was dangerous, Grenduk said, but because a keeper of reckonings did not intend to explain to the council how he had lost the 10th friend of the deep down a mine shaft on an outing. They went down past the level of the marble hall, and past the level of the founding halls, and past the deep libraries, and down into the oldest galleries, where the vaults of the great houses stood behind doors that were not doors so much as agreements between the stone and the nation, and the cart slowed at last before one such door, deep carved, worn, and Harry saw upon it a coat of arms he had never been shown but knew at once, because it was cut into the token at his breast and woven into the collar of his robe. Not the doorway in the mountain, that was the deep's own sign, but beneath it a second device, a stag and a lily and a line of old letters, and Grenduk said, "The arms of the House of Potter. This is your family's vault. It has stood shut 11 years since the autumn your parents died, waiting for the heir to be old enough to open it. You are not old enough, you are 5. But you are friend of the deep, and the nation makes its own seasons for its friends, and I am done waiting 11 years to show a Potter his own house. Give me your hand." Harry gave him his hand. Grenduk pressed Harry's palm flat to the cold stone of the door over the stag and the lily, and said a word in the deep tongue, low, and the door remembered the blood it had been shut to wait for, and it knew the blood, and it opened, stone folding back on stone with the deep grinding sigh of a thing that has held its breath a long time and may at last let it go. Inside was his family, not people. Harry knew there would be no people. He was 5, not foolish. But the vault was not a room full of gold, though there was gold, stacked in the careless drifts of a house that had been rich a long time and had stopped counting. The vault was a room full of the Potters, 11 generations of them, kept in the objects they had touched and made and cared enough about to leave behind. There were trunks of books. There were portraits rolled and standing in their cases, faces Harry did not know with the Potter jaw, and some of them the Potter hair that would not lie flat. There was a rack of wands, old ones, retired, each on its own peg with a name beneath. There was a stag worked in silver, life-sized, its antlers hung with the rings and seals of dead Potters. There were shelves of the ordinary treasures that a family keeps because a person it loved had loved them. A christening cup, a set of chessmen worn smooth, a child's first broom no longer than Harry's arm, a woman's comb, a man's spectacles very like the ones Harry did not yet know he would one day wear. And on a plain table near the door, set apart, dusted, tended, cared for across 11 years by goblin hands that owed the house a debt of honor, were the things that had come down last, the things of James and Lily. Grenduk stood back and let him look and did not name anything, because naming a thing makes it smaller, and these things were not to be made smaller. Harry went to the plain table alone. There was a wedding photograph in a silver frame, the moving kind that the wizard world made, and in it a dark-haired man with Harry's own untidy hair laughed and turned to a red-haired woman with Harry's own green eyes, and she laughed back, and the photograph played their laughing over and over, silently, the two of them turning to each other again and again down the years, caught in the one moment they had been happiest, kept for a child who had not been born yet to find when everything else was gone. There was a watch, a man's watch stopped. There was a ring. There was a letter sealed in the round hand Harry had seen in the commonplace book, and across the front of it in that hand were 4 words, "For Harry when he's ready." Harry did not open the letter. He looked at it a long time, and then he put it down gently exactly where it had been, and he said, without turning round, in a voice that was steady because he made it be steady, "I'm 5. I'm not ready. She says when I'm ready, I can wait." And Grenduk by the door, who had buried more of his own than a child could imagine across 300 years, and knew that the hardest courage is the courage to not open the thing you most want to open, said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the moment, and instead crossed the vault and stood beside the 10th friend of the deep, and put one long hand on his shoulder, and the two of them looked at the wedding photograph turning and turning in its frame. The laughing man and the laughing woman, until Harry had looked his fill, which took some time, and which the old goblin did not once try to hurry. They kept accounts with us 300 years, Grenduk said at last, quietly. Every Potter in those portraits sat where you're sitting now and looked at the ones who came before, and every one of them went back up into the sunlit world and lived a life and came down again at the end to join the ones on the wall. It is a long line, and it did not break in the autumn your parents died, though the tall folk thought it had. It bent, it came down to one. But one is not none, Karuk Nul, and the line runs through you now, and it is the oldest thing you own, older than the gold, older than the vault, older than the deep's own oath, and it is the thing the nation swore to guard when it swore to guard your blood. You are not the last Potter, you are the newest one. There is a difference, and it is the whole difference, and I wanted you to stand in this room and feel it before anyone up above could tell you the other thing, the sad thing, the last thing. You are not the last of anything, you are the first of the rest of it. They did not take much from the vault that day, because Grenduk said a house was not a shop and you did not carry it away by the armful. Harry took 3 things. He took the wedding photograph, because a person should be able to see his parents laughing. He took the child's first broom, the one no longer than his arm, because Grenduk said every Potter learned to fly before they learned to read, and it was past time, and Harry was going to be scandalously late by the standards of his house. And he took the sealed letter that said for Harry when he's ready not to open but to keep close against the day that he was. And he wore it after that inside his robe over his heart beside the token, the two of them together, the finished silver and the unopened word, and if you had asked him which of the two was heavier he could not have told you and would not have tried. That was the inheritance. What came after was the education, and it began the next morning, and it did not stop. The goblins did not teach the way the tall folk taught. Harry learned quickly, which was to sit a child in a row and pour facts into it until it was full. The goblins taught the way they did everything, which was by reckoning. They gave you a true thing and a tool and a problem, and they let you work, and they did not rescue you, and they did not praise you for less than your best. And when you got a thing right, they did not tell you well done. They told you the next, harder thing, which Harry came to understand was the highest praise the nation gave, the compliment of being handed something more difficult. Gristla taught him letters, both kinds, the ordinary hand of the tall folk and the deep script of the nation, and she taught him the deep script first, which no wizard is ever taught, on the theory, she said, that a mind which learns the hard writing first finds the easy writing easy after, whereas a mind spoiled young on the easy writing never troubles to learn the hard. Harry learned the deep script sitting on a high stool at the lore mistress's own lectern, tracing the cold fire lines until they cooled to script under his hand, and he was slow, and he was 5, and Gristla did not once let him feel that either fact excused a crooked stroke. The nation writes a thing to last 1,000 years, she told him, rubbing out his crooked stroke with a word. You will make the stroke straight, or you will make it again. There is no third thing. A name written crooked is an insult to the one it names, and half the names I keep are of goblins who would rise from the morning vaults to box your ears for a stroke like that. Again. And Harry made the stroke again, and again until it was straight, and something in him that had spent 5 years being told he was stupid and slow, and a burden discovered at a goblin's iron lectern, that he was none of those things, that he was in fact quick and careful and dogged, and that the only thing that had ever been wrong with him was that no one before Gristla had ever expected anything of him at all. Skell taught him reckoning, which the tall folk would have called mathematics, and which was more than mathematics, because in the deep the counting of a thing and the truth of a thing and the promising of a thing were all one craft, and to reckon well was to be trusted, and to be trusted was the whole of a goblin's standing. They did it together, 2 young ones at a low table with a box of counting stones between them. And Skell was a hard teacher because Skell was young enough to still find wrong answers personally insulting. And Harry was a good student because Harry had always been able to count, counting being the one thing the cupboard had never taken from him. And he found in the reckoning craft a place where the thing he had done alone in the dark to comfort himself was not a strange habit but a discipline honored deep. And endless they raced. Skell won at first, being 40 and trained, and then they were even, and then on a wet gray reckoning of the 9th ledger's lesser accounts that they were doing for practice. Harry found an error that Skell had missed, and that the ledger master before Skell had missed. A sickle mise carried 11 columns back, and he found it not by cleverness, but by the plain stubborn refusal to let a column not add up. And Skell looked at the found error a long moment, and then went and fetched Grenduk, who checked it, and confirmed it, and entered into the 9th ledger, in the good ink in his own hand, that the error had been found and by whom, so that it would stand in the record of the nation for 1,000 years that Harry Potter, friend of the deep, aged 5, had corrected the ledger, which is the goblin equivalent of a knighthood and rarer. Grenduk taught him the thing that had no name in the tall folks' schools, which the nation called the keeping of faith, and which was really the discipline of being the kind of person the oath had already declared him to be. It was not lessons. It was Grenduk being near and talking and letting Harry watch how an honorable creature met the ordinary occasions of a day. How he weighed a hard choice, how he answered a question he did not want to answer, how he kept his word in a small matter when no one would have known if he broke it, how he treated the low and the high alike and told the difference between courtesy and servility, and gave the one and never the other. Harry followed the old goblin through the halls of the deep and absorbed him the way a dry field absorbs rain, and Grenduk, who had thought his long life mostly behind him, found the strange late gift of it, that at the very end there had come a thing to pour himself into that would carry him forward past his own ending, and he did not name that either, but he poured. And there were the other lessons, the ones that came from being 5 in a place that had decided, past all argument, to keep him. He learned to fly the child's broom in a low disused gallery with a floor of soft sand the ironcasters laid down for him, and he fell off 11 times the first day, and Skell laughed at every fall and caught him every 12th time, and by the end of a week he could fly the length of the gallery and back without falling, which Grenduk said was disgracefully slow for a Potter and disgracefully fast for a creature that had learned it at 5 with no father to teach him, both being true, both truths not canceling. He learned the deep bread and the deep mushrooms and the watercraft and the names of the morning fires, and which was burned for whom. He learned that a goblin child who lost a tooth put it not under a pillow but into the forge, for the deep to keep, and Skell, scandalized that Harry had ever lost a tooth to a muggle bin, made him promise that the next one would go into the founding fire like a civilized person's, and Harry promised and meant it, and lost a tooth 3 weeks later on the deep bread and gave it solemnly to the fire with the whole ninth ledger watching, and was for that hour more goblin than wizard and glad of it. There was the matter of the magic, too, which the goblins handled better than the tall folk would have, because the goblins were not frightened of it and did not worship it. Harry was a wizard child, and wizard children leak. It had happened at Privet Drive rarely in extremity, and had earned him the cupboard and worse, for the Dursleys treated every unexplained thing as a crime he had committed on purpose. It happened in the deep, too. A dropped cup that did not break but hung an inch above the stone until Harry stopped staring at it. A cold reckoning hall that warmed the day he was made to sit in it too long and grew bored. A tangle of the good ink that spilled and then, under his stricken look, ran itself back into the well, drop by drop, tidy as a trained thing. The first time it happened in front of Skell, Harry went white and still and old, the cupboard look, the look of a child bracing for the punishment that unexplained things had always brought, and Skell, who did not know the look but knew that his friend had gone somewhere bad inside himself, fetched Grenduk at a run. Grenduk came and looked at the ink running itself back into the well, and looked at the child braced against the wall waiting to be told he was a freak and a burden and a wicked ungrateful thing, and the old goblin crouched down to Harry's height, which his knees did not love, and said in the driest and most ordinary voice he owned, "Do that again. The ink, go on, I want to see it." And when Harry, bewildered, could not do it on purpose, Grenduk nodded as though a suspicion had been confirmed. "Good," he said, "that is exactly right. That is how it is meant to work at your age and not before, and I am glad to see the blood is sound. Listen to me, Karuk Nul, and hear this once so I need not say it twice. What you did is called magic. It is not a crime. It is not a wickedness. It is not a thing you are doing at anyone. It is your blood breathing, no more sinister than a sneeze, and every wizard child does it, and the ones who are told it is wicked grow up crooked, and the ones who are told the truth grow up straight. You have been told a lie about it for 5 years by people who feared it because they could not do it. Here is the truth. It is yours. It is good. It is early, which means the blood is strong. And one day, when you are older and go to the wizard's school as your father did, they will hand you a wand and teach you to say to the magic, "Go here, do this," and it will obey you because it is yours, and a thing that is yours obeys you when you have learned to ask it properly. Until then it will leak when you are frightened or bored or grieved, and when it does you will not be punished, not here, not ever, because here we do not punish a child for the sound of his own blood. He stood, his knees complaining. The ink tidied itself. That is a courteous magic, a helpful one. It says something about the shape of you. Now come and help me tidy the rest of the ink the slow way with a cloth, because a friend of the deep does not leave a mess for the apprentices even if his blood offers to clean it for him. Up, cloth, come. And Harry came and took the cloth and cleaned the ink the slow way, and something that had been clenched in him for 5 years eased a fraction and did not clench back, because the worst secret he had, the shameful leaking wrongness at the center of him, had been looked at by the person whose good opinion he most wanted, and named good and set to useful work. And Grisla, who had come silent to the door and seen the whole of it and marked nothing in any ledger, went away and cut a fresh page of silver and began, that hour without telling anyone, to draft the letter she would one day send to school in the mountains in the fullness of years, on the day the nation judged its friend ready to walk up into the sunlit world and take the wand that was his by blood. But that was a reckoning for another season, and she folded it away half-written and kept it. The lore Grisla taught him last and most carefully, because the lore was where the danger lived. She sat him at her lectern in the long evenings and told him the true history of goblins and wizards, not the pretty version and not the bitter one but the reckoned one, the treaties and the risings and the slow, patient theft of the goblins' rights by a folk who had the numbers and the wands and the ministry. And she did not soften it and she did not let it curdle into bitterness, because a grudge, she said, was a debt you paid to your enemy with your own peace and got nothing back for. You will go up into their world one day, Grisla told him, and you will find that they despise us and they will expect you to despise us with them because you wear their face. And you will not, and they will not understand why, and some of them will hate you for it as they hated your ancestor. I am not teaching you this to make you angry at your own kind. I am teaching you this so that when the day comes and a wizard sneers at a goblin in front of you and waits for you to laugh, you will know exactly what you are looking at, which is 3,000 years of a strong folk telling itself a comfortable lie about a folk it has wronged, and you will not laugh and you will not be surprised and you will not be moved. You will simply be a potter, which is a wizard who keeps faith with goblins, and you will pay the price of it as your house has always paid, with your head up. That is the lore. It is the heaviest thing I have to give you, and it is the truest, and I give it to you slowly, a little each evening, because a child cannot carry it all at once, and neither some evenings can I. He thrived. That is the plain word for it, and it is the true one. The child who had come down the black stair a shadow, a boy who made himself small against walls and gave things away cheap because they cost him nothing, grew, in the warm gold light of the deep, into something the Dursleys of Privet Drive would not have recognized and would not have liked. A child sure of his welcome, quick to speak and quick to listen, who walked through the halls of a nation 3,000 years old and greeted its people by name and was greeted back, who laughed now, easily, a thing he had not much done above, and who carried himself with the settled, unhurried confidence of a person who has, at last and for the first time, a floor beneath him that will hold his weight. They ate together most nights, the three of them, at the small stone table in Grenduk's own chambers off the ninth ledger, the old goblin and the stripling and the wizard cub, and it was at that table, more than at any lectern, that Harry learned what a family was, having had the word explained to him for 5 years chiefly by its absence. Grenduk cooked badly and refused all comment on the fact. Skell brought the honey bread and complained about the older apprentices and was told by Grenduk that in his day an apprentice who complained about his elders was given their work to do until he understood them better. And Skell said that in Grenduk's day everything was made of rocks and spite, and Grenduk, unoffended, agreed, and said they had been better rocks and it had been a finer spite. Harry sat between them and ate more than he had ever been allowed to eat in his life and laughed until his sides hurt, and one night, full and warm and drowsy, he asked the question that had been sitting quietly under all his happiness, the question of a child who has learned the hard way that good things end. "Will I have to go back?" Harry said. "For good, I mean, not just to feed the ward, when the summer's over. Will I have to go back and live in the cupboard and pretend none of this happened?" The table went quiet. Skell looked at Grenduk. Grenduk set down his cup. "No," Grenduk said. "You will go up into the world above in time because you are a wizard and the world above is half of what you are, and a creature raised on only half of itself grows crooked, as I have told you. You will go to their school when you are old enough, as your father did, and learn the wand craft that is your blood right, and take your place among your own kind, because it is your place and you are owed it. That is not going back to the cupboard, that is going forward into your own house. And you will not go alone, and you will not go unguarded, and you will not go without a home under the world to come down to whenever the world above turns cold, which it will, because you are a potter and the world above turns cold on potters. You are not a guest here any longer, Karuknul. A guest goes back. You are a friend of the deep, and the deep is yours, and it does not close behind you when you climb the stair." "Do you understand me? You'll still be here," Harry said. "When I come down, you'll be here." "I will be here," said Grenduk, "until I am not, which is a great while yet, and after that Skell will be here, and after Skell one he has not met, and after that one another, for the oath does not end with me or with you, but runs down both our lines together, yours and the nation's, to the ending of the world. You will never come down the stair and find the deep gone, or the door shut, or your name struck from the ledger. That is the one thing in all the world I can promise you cannot be taken away, and I promise it, and my people do not break a promise, not in 3,000 years. He picked up his cup again. "Now eat your bread. You are 5 and it is late, and a friend of the deep who falls asleep in the honey bread will never hear the end of it from a certain stripling, and neither will I." He did go back up now and then, because the old blood magic on the house in Little Winging had to be fed, and it fed on Harry naming the place his home, and Grenduk was not ready yet to let the wizard Dumbledore learn that the last potter had slipped his net. So every 8th or 9th day Grenduk took Harry up the black stair and through the shadows to the corner of Privet Drive, and Harry went in and slept a night or two in the cupboard, and let the ward drink its fill of him and came away again. Grenduk called it stretching the ward and did it with the precise care of a goblin who understood other people's magic better than they did, drawing the protection out to its limit and letting it spring back whole, telling the old wizard nothing. The visits were strange and grew stranger because the house had not changed and Harry had. He came in now standing straight, and it unsettled the Dursleys past anything they could put a name to. Aunt Petunia watched him over the ironing with the wary sideways look a person gives a dog that has learned a new trick and may have learned others. Dudley, who had spent 5 years finding Harry an easy and satisfying thing to hurt, tried the old game once, a shove in the hall, and found that the cousin who had always folded up small against the wall now simply stepped aside, unbothered, unhurried, and looked at him after with a mild clear attention that had nothing to push against. And Dudley did not try the shove a second time, because there is no sport in shoving a person who will not be frightened, and Dudley, for all his faults, had an animal's instinct for where the fear had gone out of a thing. Only Uncle Vernon carried on as before, too solid in his certainties to notice that the ground had moved, and Harry let him, because Grisla had taught him that a person who has decided not to see you is doing you the favor of leaving you alone, and you do not correct such a person, you thank the stars for him and keep your peace. He never told them where he went, he never told them anything. But on the last of those visits, drying the supper things at the sink with his true name warm at his breast under the cast-off shirt, Harry caught Aunt Petunia looking at him in the black window over the sink, her reflection watching his reflection. And for the length of that watching her face was not sour and not afraid but only tired and old and sad in a way he did not understand, the face of a woman looking at her dead sister's son and seeing at last that he had found the thing she had spent her whole life pretending not to want, the old world, the world that had chosen Lily and not her, opening its arms to Lily's boy the way it had never once opened them to Petunia Evans. She did not say anything, neither did Harry, but he dried the last plate and set it in the rack, and before he went to the cupboard he said quietly to her reflection in the black glass, "Thank you for keeping me. I know you didn't want to. You did it anyway. That counts for something. Grenduk says keeping faith you didn't choose counts for more, not less." And he went to bed and left her standing at the sink with the tap running over her hands, and he did not see whether her face was wet, because he had learned in the deep that you give a person the dignity of grieving where you cannot see them. And he gave her that and went down to the cupboard and slept, and in the morning Grenduk took him home, and home now was the deep. But the deep was under the world, and the world went on above it, and the world had begun, slowly, to notice a hole where a boy had been. It began with the wards, which were old blood magic and did not lie. Far to the south, in a tower at a school in the mountains, an old wizard with a long silver beard kept upon a spindle-legged table a row of small silver instruments that whirred and puffed and had turned, steadily and reassuringly, for 5 years, one of them for each of the protections he had woven about a house in Little Winging on a November night when he left a child upon a step. Albus Dumbledore was a careful man and a busy one, and the instruments asked little of him beyond an occasional glance, and for 5 years the glance had told him what he wished to be told, that the blood ward held, that the child was where the child was safe, that the great slow machinery of the protection he had built was doing its patient work. He did not glance often. A watched pot, even a magical one, and Dumbledore had a school to run and a Wisengamot to sit and a confederation to chair and 100 slow schemes turning, and the child in Surrey was, of all the things on Albus Dumbledore's spindle-legged table, the one he worried about least, because he had built that protection with his own hands and knew it to be good. So it was some weeks before he noticed that one of the instruments had changed its note. It did not stop. That was the thing that troubled him, when at last he stood before the table late one evening with his half-moon spectacles pushed up his nose and really looked. It did not stop, which would have meant the ward was broken and the child gone and would have brought him down the mountain that very hour. It faltered. It ran and then it thinned and then it caught again, over and over, the note of a protection that was being stretched, gently, expertly, by something that knew exactly how far a home ward could be drawn before it tore and had no intention of tearing it. A ward is broken by a stranger. A ward is stretched by a departure that means to return. Someone was taking the child out of the house for long stretches and bringing him back before the ward could fail, and doing it, Dumbledore saw, studying the faltering silver instrument with the stillness of a very great wizard who has encountered something he did not arrange, with a care and a patience and a precise knowledge of his own protections that no ordinary kidnapper could possibly possess. "Now that," said Albus Dumbledore softly to the empty office and the sleeping portraits and the phoenix drowsing on its perch, "is interesting. And I do not, on the whole, care for interesting where that particular child is concerned." It must be said, in fairness to a man history would judge harshly and gently by turns, that Albus Dumbledore did not want the child for himself, or not in the way that Dolar's Umbridge, 300 miles away, wanted him. He wanted him safe, and he wanted him safe in a very particular place behind the blood ward, growing up ordinary and unspoilt and unaware, because Albus Dumbledore carried in his own head a thing he had told no one, a prophecy in a war not finished, and he had reasoned in the cold high room of his own strategy that the child would one day be needed, that the thing that had marked him in the cradle was not gone but sleeping. and that a boy raised humble behind his mother's sacrifice would grow into a man who could be guided, when the hour came, toward the sacrifice the prophecy might yet require. It was not cruelty. Dumbledore was not cruel. It was arithmetic, the arithmetic of a man who had learned in his own youth what came of loving power too well, and had disciplined himself ever after to love only the outcomes, to move people as one moves the pieces of a long game played for stakes no single piece could be told. And a piece that has walked off the board on its own legs into the keeping of a power he does not command is a piece a careful player must recover, gently if he can, before the game turns. He looked at the faltering silver instrument a long while, and he did not send for the child that night because Albus Dumbledore never moved before he understood, and he did not yet understand who could stretch his wards with such surgical care and to what end. But he began that night to find out. Mrs. Figg confirmed the half of it she could see. She had written to Dumbledore twice in the week since a stooped old solicitor had come to Privet Drive with a cream-colored paper and taken the child away, and both letters had gone unread in the great drift of correspondence on the headmaster's desk, because a squib's report of a quiet summer was not the sort of thing that fought its way to the top of that particular pile. But when Dumbledore, troubled now, went looking, he found the letters and read them, and learned what Arabella had seen, that the Dursleys had signed the child over to an estate for the summer on paper willingly, even eagerly, that the child went away for days at a stretch and came back changed, taller, straighter, fed, wearing once, under his dreadful cast-off clothes, something at his throat on a dark cord that Arabella had not been able to see clearly and had not liked the not seeing of. And that the child, the last time she had kept him, had corrected her gently and without heat when she miscounted the biscuits, pushing two back across the table and saying it wouldn't be fair, and had looked at her while he said it. Arabella wrote in a way that no child in that house had ever looked at anyone, straight and sure, and unafraid, as though he had found somewhere a thing worth standing up straight for, and Arabella did not know where, and she did not sleep easy for a week after she had written it. Because whatever had put that look on the child's face had done it entirely outside the reach of the old wizard whose job it was to know. And the last thread came, as such threads so often did, through the ministry and through paper. For the estate of James and Lily Potter was held in custody at Gringotts, as the estates of the old houses were, and Gringotts was a bank, and a bank moved paper, and paper, in the wizarding world as in every other, left awake. A filing had been made. It was a small filing, dry, procedural, the sort 1,000 of which crossed a ministry clerk's desk in a month. A notice lodged by the Goblin nation in its capacity as custodian of the Potter estate, invoking an ancient clause of the estate's founding charter, a clause 3 centuries old and never before invoked, that granted the custodian standing to secure the person of the heir where the heir was found to be in want or in danger, for the protection of the line and the estate both. It was lawful. It was, in fact, impeccably, unanswerably lawful, which was the Goblins' way. They did not break the tall folks' laws. They knew them better than the tall folk did and used them like a blade. The filing sat in the registry of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, in the Being Division, where such goblin paper was sent, and it might have sat there a year unread, except that it had the name Potter on it, and there was one person in that division who read everything with the name Potter on it, and had done for 5 years, patiently waiting, the way a spider reads its web. Her name was Dolores Umbridge, and she was in that year a junior thing, an undersecretary's undersecretary, a plump, soft-voiced woman with a fondness for pink and a hatred of goblins so pure and so total that it had become, over the years, less a prejudice than a principle, the organizing fact of her, the thing she was for. She read the filing, she read it twice. She read the ancient clause and the invocation of it and the name of the heir it secured, and she set it down upon her tidy desk with hands that had gone very still, and she permitted herself, alone in her pink office, a smile that had nothing of warmth in it and everything of appetite, because Dolores Umbridge had wanted a great many things across a small, grasping life and had reached most of them by patience, and here, arriving on her desk on a slip of goblin paper, was the largest thing she had ever wanted and had never dared to reach for, a lever. A wizard child, the famous one, the symbol, the fortune in the keeping of goblins, unlawfully, monstrously, against all nature and every proper order of things, and a ministry clause and a career's worth of ambition, and the cold hard thing in her that had been looking all its life for exactly this door. "Oh," said Dolores Umbridge softly to her pink office and her plate of plates painted with kittens, in a voice like sugar poured over a blade, "No, no, 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 we can't have that, we can't have that at all." And she reached for a fresh sheet of ministry parchment and dipped her quill and began in a small, tidy, dreadful hand to write. Far below her and below the streets, and below the deepest cellar any muggle had ever dug, Harry Potter sat on a high stool at Grisla's lectern making the stroke of a name straight, with his father's laughing photograph in his robe and his mother's unopened letter over his heart and the sworn faith of a nation 3,000 years old at his back, and did not know that up in the sunlit world 2 powers had just in the same gray week turned their attention to the hole where a boy had been and begun. each in its own way, one to keep him safe and one to make him hers, to come looking for him. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The world above takes notice. Albus Dumbledore came to Gringotts on a Tuesday in his own person without appointment, which he had learned across a long life was the way to arrive when you wished to be told the truth by people who had prepared a lie for the version of you they expected. The tellers of the Marble Hall knew him, of course. Everyone knew him. He was the most famous wizard alive, and the tellers watched the tall figure in the plum-colored robes come up the hall between the counters, nodding to this goblin in that benign twinkling unhurried, and not one of them nodded back, because the nation had been told he would come and had been told what he was coming for, and a goblin who knows what you want does not smile at you while you fail to get it. He asked courteously to speak with someone regarding the Potter estate. He was shown courteously to a small stone room off the Marble Hall, the room the nation kept for wizards who thought they had come to take something and had actually come to be refused, and he was left there courteously for 40 minutes, which was a message, in which he received, sitting patiently with his hands folded, because Albus Dumbledore had refused a great many people in his time, and knew a well-made refusal when he was seated inside one. When the door opened, it was not a teller who came in. It was Grenduk in his keeper's chain, with 2 of the council's law speakers at his back and Uldrock of the Iron Guard at the door, and Dumbledore rose, and inclined his head with a respect that was not entirely feigned, because whatever else he was, Albus Dumbledore had genuine reverence for old things and old peoples, and there was no older people in the Isles than the one whose keeper of reckonings had just walked into the room with the settled hostility of a closed vault. "You are the executor," Dumbledore said. It was not quite a question. "I am the sponsor," said Grenduk. "The estate has an executor, and you will not meet him because you have no business with the estate. You have come about the child. Sit, Albus Dumbledore, and we will speak plainly, because I have neither the years to waste on the other kind of speaking that you have wasted so many of yours in, nor the patience." "Sit." Dumbledore sat. "You know why I have come." "I know why you think you have come," said Grenduk. "You have come to recover a piece that walked off your board. You built a protection about a house in Surrey 5 years ago, blood magic keyed to a child's mother's sacrifice, and you left the child inside it and turned your attention to larger games, and the protection ran quietly and told you what you wished to hear until some weeks passed, it began to falter, and you came to see who had reached into your careful arrangement without your leave. That is why you think you have come. Shall I tell you why you have actually come? You have come to learn that the arrangement was never as safe as your arithmetic told you, and that a 5-year-old you filed under solved has become the most guarded child in Britain, and that the guarding is not yours and cannot be made yours, and you have come, though you do not yet know it, to be taught the one lesson your long, clever life has kept from you, which is that there are older laws than yours and older loyalties, and that not everything on this island answers in the end to Albus Dumbledore. There was a silence. Dumbledore's face did not change, which was itself a kind of change, from a man who had many faces to a man who had stopped choosing between them. "Tell me what has happened to Harry," he said quietly, and for the first time the twinkle was gone from him entirely, and what was left was old and sharp and very still. "Not the philosophy, the fact. What have you done with the child?" "We have done nothing with him," said Grenduk. "We do not do things with children. We have done a thing for him which is different, and which you may find you do not have the framework to understand, having spent your life doing things with people for their own good. Here is the fact, since you ask for the fact. 11 weeks ago the child returned goblin silver freely into a goblin's hand, taking nothing, not knowing it could be kept. 9 weeks ago the Council of the Reckoning judged that the blood of the House of Potter, which did the nation a great service 300 years gone, and never once asked it repaid, had bred true in him. 7 weeks ago the whole nation of the Deep gathered in the Hall of the 12 Ledgers, where no wizard has stood since his ancestor, and named the child Karuk Nul, Friend of the Deep, the 10th wizard so named in 3,000 years, and swore to him and to his line the blood reckoning, which is the oldest and gravest oath my people make, and which binds the whole weight of the Deep to stand between his blood and any power that reaches for it. That is the fact, Albus Dumbledore. The child is not your ward any longer, or not only. He is ours. We have sworn it on the founding stars, and we do not unswear. Whatever Dumbledore had come expecting, it had not been that. He was a very great wizard, and he had seen and done a very great deal, and it took him a moment, a visible moment, to fit the size of the thing into the room. When he spoke again, his voice had changed once more, and there was something in it that had not been there, a care, the care of a man who has just understood that he is standing much closer to the edge of something than he had thought. "You cannot swear an oath of that kind to a wizard child," Dumbledore said slowly, feeling for the ground. "He is 5, he cannot consent to be bound. He is a minor, and by our law his guardianship was signed over in writing willingly by his lawful guardians to the executor of his estate, entirely within your law, which we know better than you do, having read more of it," said the first of the council's law speakers, a lean grey goblin with a voice like a filing cabinet closing. Vernon and Petunia Dursley, the child standing guardians under wizarding and muggle law, both consented and signed. The estate assumed custody by a clause of its founding charter 3 centuries old, lawful, unrepealed, and untouchable. There is no statute in the whole body of your law, Chief Warlock, and we have looked, that forbids a goblin executor from securing the person of an heir he is charged to protect. You are welcome to search for one. We already have. It does not exist. What you're feeling, Albus Dumbledore, is not the discovery of a crime. It is the discovery that a thing you assumed was forbidden was merely unprecedented, and that we have done it, and that it is legal, and that you cannot undo it with any instrument your law provides. And as to consent, said Grenduk, the child was not bound as a wizard binds, by contract a minor cannot make. He was named as one names a friend, and the naming asks only that he keep faith, which is a thing a child of 5 can do better than most men of 100, as you would know if you had ever troubled to ask him. He was told the whole truth of it, the weight and the cost, and given 3 days to refuse, and 2 of the 9 before him did refuse and were honored for it. He did not refuse. He said, and I was there, that we had asked him only to keep faith with people who had kept faith with him, and that it was not a hard question. You may disagree that a child can bind himself so. The founding stars did not disagree. They blazed. I do not expect that to mean anything to you, but you ask for the fact, and the fact is that the sky itself witnessed the naming, and the sky is not in your jurisdiction either. Dumbledore was quiet a long moment. Then, because he was, whatever his faults, a man capable of recognizing when the board had changed beneath him, he asked the only question that was left to a player in his position. May I see him? They let him see Harry, because the nation had nothing to hide and much to display, and because Grisla, consulted, had said that a wizard who has decided a child is a piece is best cured by being made to stand in front of the child and try to keep thinking it. They brought Harry up to the small stone room, and he came in between Skell and Grisla in his grey robe with his true name at the collar, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at the old wizard in the plum-colored robes, and the old wizard looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and it was the old wizard who looked away first, which no one in that room but Grisla fully understood. For Albus Dumbledore had carried a picture of this child in his head for 5 years, and the picture had been of a boy, small, ordinary, humble, unspoilt, malleable, a blank and grateful page on which the necessary things could one day be written, and the child in the doorway was not that boy. Stood straight, and he met the most famous wizard in the world with a clear, mild, unfrightened attention that had nothing to sell and nothing to fear, and he was plainly, visibly, all the way through, a person, finished and true, belonging where he stood, and Dumbledore's long arithmetic, which had depended on a page not yet written, felt for one cold moment the vertigo of a sum that would not come out. "Hello," Harry said. "You're Professor Dumbledore. Grisla told me you'd come. You left me on the step." "She told me that too. She said you did it to keep me safe, and that it did keep me safe after its fashion, and that I should be fair to you about it even though it meant the cupboard, because you couldn't have known about the cupboard." He considered the old wizard. "Did you know about the cupboard? It was not an accusation. That was the terrible thing about it," Dumbledore would think later in the long night after. "It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question, asked without heat, by a child who had been taught by goblins to want the true answer and to be able to bear it, and it went into the old wizard under all his armor and lodged somewhere he had thought long since scarred over. "No," Dumbledore said at last, and it cost him, and he was honest, because the child had asked honestly, and there are debts even a strategist must pay. "No, Harry, I did not know about the cupboard. I should have. I told myself the blood ward was enough, and I did not look closely, because looking closely at that house would have shown me things I did not wish to have to act upon, and I was busy, and I let being busy excuse me. That was wrong. I am sorry for it. It is one of a number of things I have done to you, and for you, and around you, out of what I believe to be necessity, and you will judge them all one day when you are grown and know the whole of it, and I will abide your judgment, because you have earned the right to make it, which is more than I intended for you and better than I deserve." Harry looked at him a while longer. Then he nodded once and said, "All right, thank you for saying it true. Grenduk says most grown-ups can't. You can, that's something." And that was all, and it was, in its way, the largest thing anyone had said to Albus Dumbledore in a long time. And he carried it out of Gringotts and up the marble hall and into the sunlit street, an old man who had come to recover a piece and had been handed, instead, a person, and did not yet know what he would do with it, only that the arithmetic was broken and would have to be done again from the beginning, and that he found, walking up Diagon Alley in the ordinary afternoon, that he was not entirely sorry. That might have been the end of it, or the beginning of a slow, patient accommodation between an old wizard learning humility and an old nation that had never needed to. It was not, because there was another power that had turned its attention to the hole where a boy had been, and that power was not capable of humility, and did not want the child safe, and did not want him at all, in fact, except as a lever, and levers do not care what they pry. Dolar's Umbridge did not come to Gringotts in person. Dolar's Umbridge understood, as Dumbledore did not quite, that the way to move against goblins was never to stand in front of them, where their law and their patience and their long memory all told against you, but to move through paper and through the tall folks' own machinery, where the goblin's 3,000-year advantage counted for nothing and her own particular genius counted for everything. She had spent 5 weeks building her instrument, and she built it well, because building such instruments was the one thing in the world Dolores Umbridge did with real relish. She could not find a law that forbade what the goblins had done, because there was none. So she made one, or rather she made the appearance of one, which in the ministry is frequently as good and occasionally better. She drafted and shepherded and flattered and threatened through 3 committees, an emergency amendment to the regulation of the guardianship of magical minors, a small dry document that did one small dry monstrous thing. It declared that the welfare of any magical child was a matter of ministry oversight, and that no magical child might be placed in the sole custody of a being not classified as a wizarding guardian, and that goblins, being classed under her own being division as creatures with near-human intelligence rather than as wizarding persons, could not be wizarding guardians, and that therefore any magical child currently in goblin custody must, for the child's own protection, be removed to a proper wizarding home pending review. It was retroactive, it named no names, it did not have to. There was exactly one magical child in Britain in goblin custody, and everyone who mattered knew his name, and the beauty of the instrument, the thing Umbridge admired in it as an artist admires her own line, was that it never once said Potter and reached only Potter and dressed the reaching in the language of a child's welfare, so that to oppose it was to seem to oppose the welfare of children, which no politician could afford and no goblin could perform. And she found a partner because an instrument needs a hand of standing to wield it, and Dolores Umbridge in that year had ambition and venom and paper but not yet standing, and she knew exactly whose standing to borrow. Lucius Malfoy received her in the long drawing room at the manor, and heard her out, and turned the thing over in his cool mind, and saw in it what she had known he would see, which was not a child's welfare and not the discomfiture of goblins, though he would enjoy both, but an asset. The famous orphan, the marked survivor their whole trembling post-war world had built into a living idol, removed from the keeping of grasping subterranean creatures by the decisive action of a concerned and public-spirited wizarding family, and placed, for his own protection, in a proper home. His home. The Malfoy name, tarnished by a war it had been on the wrong and then hastily the right side of, scrubbed clean in a single stroke and gilded, the family that saved the Potter heir, and the child himself growing up under Malfoy influence, shaped by Malfoy hands, his fame and his fortune and his enormous latent usefulness all curving, gently over the years, toward the interests of the House of Malfoy. Lucius did not smile, because Lucius rarely smiled, smiling being a small surrender of information. But he set down his glass and he said in his soft, cultured voice, "Madam Umbridge, I believe you and I understand one another. Leave the instrument with me. I will find it a hand." "There will be resistance," Umbridge said in her girlish poured sugar voice. "The creatures will not simply hand him over. They have their charter and their nasty little laws, and that meddling old man has taken an interest, one hears." "The creatures," said Lucius Malfoy, "will discover that their charter is a document granted by the Ministry of Magic and revocable by the Ministry of Magic, and that a nation which lives by the goodwill of a bank is a nation that lives by our goodwill, and that we have a great deal more of it to withdraw than they have gold to lose. And Dumbledore will discover that a public instrument, lawfully passed in the sacred cause of a child's welfare, is very difficult for even a chief warlock to be seen to oppose without appearing to prefer goblins to children, which, whatever his private eccentricities, he cannot afford in daylight." He rose. "The law will go first because the law is cleaner. We will present the order at the bank correctly with witnesses and demand the child. If they yield him, we have won cleanly. And if they do not yield him," and here Lucius Malfoy did something with his face that was not a smile and was worse, a cold arrangement of the features that had, somewhere far back in it, appetite, "then they will have refused a lawful order of the ministry in front of witnesses and become, in that instant, from a chartered nation to a den of creatures, unlawfully holding a wizard child against the ministry's writ. And then, Madam Umbridge, the law will have done all it can, and the recovery of the child will become, regrettably, a matter of enforcement. And enforcement is a thing I can arrange through channels that do not appear in any registry and answer to no charter at all." He walked her to the door. "Go home, sleep well. The Potter boy will be under a proper roof by the turning of the season. You have my word, and the word of a Malfoy, whatever the gutter says of it these days, is still worth a great deal more than the promise of a goblin." Far below, the nation felt it come. They felt it the way an old country feels the first change of a weather that will become a storm, not in any single thing but in the sum of small things, a filing here, a committee vote there, a name spoken in the wrong offices, the particular quality of the quiet that gathers before the tall folk do something they have decided to call necessary. Grisla read it in the omen stones and did not sleep. Uldrock read it in the movements of the ministry's enforcement, in hit wizards quietly reassigned and licenses quietly issued, and doubled the iron guard at the marble hall and along the upper galleries, and said nothing to frighten the child. And Ragnarok read it on the plain scale of his plain office, weighing what was coming against what the nation had sworn, and found, as he had known he would find, that the two did not cancel, and that there would be no clean way through, and that the blood reckoning, sworn 7 weeks past in the light of the founding stars, was about to be tried in exactly the fire that Grisla had read at the innermost stone and told no one 4 years and a lifetime ago. The delegation came to the marble hall on the Friday in the middle of the morning when the hall was full, which was deliberate, because Lucius Malfoy did nothing of consequence without witnesses and had brought his own. There were 7 of them. Malfoy walked at the front in robes the color of a storm cloud, his silver-topped cane keeping time on the marble, and at his shoulder came Dolores Umbridge in a cardigan the pink of a hospital ward, holding a document case against her chest with both hands as a mother holds an infant. Behind them walked 2 officers of magical law enforcement in Ministry Blue, and a thin nervous clerk from the Being Division carrying a second case, and trailing at a careful distance with a self-writing quill already scratching, a reporter from the Daily Prophet whom Malfoy had invited precisely so that whatever happened next would happen in front of the whole reading wizarding world by tea time. The tellers watched them come up the hall and did not stop their work, and the click and rattle of the counting went on, and the delegation reached the great central counter and found it manned, no longer by tellers, but by 2 goblins in the chains of the council's law speakers, and between them, in his keeper's chain, Grenduk. And ranged along the walls of the hall, where a moment before there had been only shadow, stood the iron guard black-harnessed, unmoving, a great deal of them, and Uldrock at their head, and none of them touched a weapon, and the message of them was complete without it. "I am here," said Lucius Malfoy in his soft carrying voice, laying a sheet of ministry parchment upon the counter and turning it so the seal faced the goblins, in the service of a lawful order of the Ministry of Magic. This document is an emergency directive under the regulation of the guardianship of magical minors, freshly amended, which finds that no magical child may be held in the sole custody of a being not classed as a wizarding guardian, and which requires the immediate surrender into proper wizarding care of the magical minor Harry James Potter, presently held by this institution. I am the wizarding guardian nominated to receive him. The order is signed, sealed, and effective from this morning. You will produce the child. He set 2 fingers on the parchment. I would advise you to produce him quickly and quietly and in front of these good witnesses so that the whole affair may be concluded with the dignity appropriate to a bank and not otherwise. The lean gray law speaker drew the parchment across the counter with 1 long finger and read it, all of it slowly, while the hall waited and the prophet's quill scratched and Umbridge's soft breathing was the loudest thing at the counter, and when he had done he did not hand it back. He set it down and he placed upon it, beside it, a second document older, heavier, sealed in a wax gone dark with age. "The ministry," said the law speaker in his voice like a filing cabinet closing, "may pass what amendments it pleases regarding the guardianship of its own citizens. This is the founding charter of the Potter estate, granted and countersigned by the Ministry of Magic in the reign of its own law, 311 years ago, and never repealed. It grants the custodian of the estate the standing to secure the person of the heir. The child was placed in that custody by his lawful guardians, in writing, of their free will, before your amendment existed. Your amendment is not retroactive in its drafting, Mr. Malfoy. I have read it 4 times. It speaks of children placed in the present and the future, and is silent as the grave upon children already placed, because Madame Umbridge, who drafted it, is skilled, and knew that a retroactive seizure of a custody lawfully granted would not survive 1 hour before the Wisengamot, and hoped we would not notice the seam. We notice the seam. We notice all the seams. It is the whole of what we do." He pushed the ministry parchment back across the counter, an inch, no more. "The order does not reach this child because this child was already placed before the order was born. He remains in the custody of his estate lawfully under a charter older than your amendment and superior to it. The nation declines to produce him, not because it defies your law, because it keeps your law better than you do, and your law, correctly read, does not give him to you. Take up your parchment, Mr. Malfoy." It has no force here. There was a silence in the marble hall. The prophet's quill had stopped. Dolores Umbridge had gone the color of her own cardigan and then a color past it, and her wide soft face worked once, but she said nothing because she understood law and she had heard her own seam named aloud, and she knew with the sick certainty of a craftsman shown the flaw in her own work that the goblin was right and that the clean way had failed. Lucius Malfoy did not go the color of anything. He looked at the goblin across the counter for a long moment, and then he took up his parchment, unhurried, and rolled it and slid it into his sleeve, and when he spoke his voice had not risen at all, which was the most frightening thing about it. "You are, I confess, better lawyers than I had allowed for," Malfoy said. "It is a common error with your kind. One sees the vaults and the gold and forgets the mines behind them. I shall not make it again." He gathered his witnesses with a small movement of 2 fingers. But hear me, and hear me clearly before your good witnesses, so that no one may say after that it was not offered fairly. You have refused in this hall in the open a directive of the Ministry of Magic in the matter of a wizard child's welfare. You will dress the refusal in charters and seams as you please, and perhaps the Wisengamot will agree with you, and perhaps it will not, and either way it will take months, and meanwhile the wizarding world will read tomorrow over its breakfast that the goblins of Gringotts are holding the famous Harry Potter against the Ministry's writ, and will not give him up. That is the story now. You have made it the story by refusing me in front of a quill. And a nation whose whole prosperity rests upon the goodwill of the wizards it serves has just spent a very great deal of that goodwill, publicly, on the person of a single small boy. He inclined his head, a courtesy that was an insult. I do hope he is worth it. Good morning. And he turned and walked back down the marble hall as he had entered it, his cane keeping time on the stone, and his witnesses hurried after him. And the prophet's quill began again to scratch, and the law speaker watched them go with a face like a closed door, and did not look once at the shadowed gallery high above the hall where a plain old goblin in an undyed robe stood at the rail and watched the whole of it and waited on the plain scale of his plain office, and found, as he had known he would, that the clean way was ended, and that what came next would not be clean, and could not be refused, because the nation had chosen, 7 weeks ago in the light of the founding stars, and a choice made in that light did not get cheaper when the bill came due. The council convened, and it did not debate whether to yield the child, because that had been decided on the night of the naming, and could not be undecided, an oath being an oath. It debated only how to meet what was coming, and the debate was sharp and cold and practical, the master of gold counting the cost to the charter and the vaults, the law speakers mapping every move the tall folks' instrument could make in every lawful counter, Uldrock laying out the harder arithmetic of force, and through all of it Grenduk sat by the 9th alcove and said little, because the one thing he had to say he had already said 7 weeks before in this same hall. That the nation would either be a people that pays what it owes, or a strong room with teeth, and that it had chosen, and that a choice made in the light of the founding stars did not get cheaper when the bill came due. It never did. That was what made it a choice and not merely a preference. The deep made itself ready in the days that followed, and the readying was a thing worth the seeing, for a nation 3,000 years old does not prepare the way a household bars its door. Uldrock mustered the Iron Guard, and they came up out of the lower barracks in their hundreds, black-harnessed, silent, the oldest standing army in the Isles, and took their stations along the galleries and the bridges and the black stair, and the marble hall above filled quietly with more tellers than any bank required, each of whom, if you had looked closely, wore beneath his clerk's robe the harness of a soldier. But that was only the iron of it, and the iron was the least of what the deep could bring to bear. Grisla went down to the reading floor and did not come up for 2 days, reading the storm as it gathered, mapping its hour and its shape in the warming of ancient stones. And in the deepest galleries, in the oldest places, where the wards of the nation were not spells laid on but law grown in, worked into the living rock across 3,000 years, something began slowly to wake. Harry felt it before anyone told him, felt the low note of the deep change its key, deepen, gather, the way the air changes before a great bell is struck, and when he asked Grenduk what it was, the old goblin was quiet a moment before he answered. That is the oath, Grenduk said. You cannot hear an oath, the tall folk would tell you. An oath is only words. They are wrong as they are wrong about most deep things. An oath sworn on the founding stars and the deep stone is not words. It is a shape put into the world, and it holds a load like an arch, and when a weight comes down upon the thing it was sworn to guard, the arch takes the weight, and you can hear it take the weight if your ears are made right, as a bridge sings under a cart. That sound is the blood reckoning waking to a weight it feels coming. It has slept 7 weeks since the night we swore it. It is not asleep now. It knows they are coming for you, Karuk Nul, before they know it themselves, and it is gathering to stand. Do not be afraid of the sound. It is the sound of a promise keeping itself. It is the truest sound in the world, and there is not a wizard alive who has ever heard it, and you are hearing it now because it is yours, and it is singing for you. He put his hand on the child's shoulder. Let it sing, and come away from the deep galleries, because a 5-year-old does not need to stand under a waking oath at bedtime. Come, bread, sleep. The arch will hold the roof up without your help tonight. Albus Dumbledore read the Daily Prophet the next morning at the long table in the great hall, with the owls wheeling out overhead and the students not yet returned and the toast going cold under his hand. And he read the headline the Goblin had promised Malfoy Goblins defy ministry, hold boy who lived in vaults, and the byline and the careful anonymous quotes from a source close to the matter, and he understood the whole shape of it at a glance. Because reading the shape of things at a glance was the labor of his life, he saw the amendment for the manufactured thing it was. He saw Umbridge's hand in the drafting and Malfoy's hand on the purse and the quill. He saw that the clean legal road had already failed at the counter, which meant that a man like Lucius Malfoy, having staked his name in public and lost the first move, would not now retreat, but would turn to the roads that did not appear in registries, and that somewhere in the near dark a price was being agreed and a wand or two engaged, and that the seizure of a 5-year-old, which had begun as an amendment, was going to end as an ambush. And Albus Dumbledore, who had come to Gringotts a week before to recover a piece and had been handed a person, sat with his cold toast and did the arithmetic again, the whole of it, from the beginning, as he had promised the child in the small stone room that he would. He did not want Harry with the Malfoys. That was catastrophe, for the child and for every long design Dumbledore had woven about him, a potter shaped from the cradle by hands that had served the enemy and would serve him again the moment the wind changed. He did not, he found, examining the feeling with the wary honesty the child had somehow taught him to want, wish the goblins to lose either, though a goblin had told him to his face that not everything on the island answered to Albus Dumbledore, and it had stung exactly because it was true. What he wished sitting there was a thing he had not let himself simply wish about that particular child in 5 years. He wished him safe, and not for the war, and not for the prophecy, and not for the greater good, but because a straight-standing boy had asked him without heat whether he had known about the cupboard and had thanked him for telling the truth. It was an inconvenient wish. It did not fit the arithmetic. Dumbledore folded the newspaper and looked at it a while and made no move to intervene, and told himself it was because he did not yet know where or when the blow would fall. That was half the truth. The other half, which he did not say even to the sleeping portraits, was that he had decided to let the goblins guard the child, because he had looked at the child and at the nation both and reckoned, on a scale he did not often trust, that between the founding stars and the founder of everything Albus Dumbledore had ever built, the founding stars were, this once, the safer bet. He would watch. He would place himself where he could be reached. And when the blow fell, he would decide in the moment, which he had never liked to do and would do now, for a child who had thanked him for the truth. They told Harry because the nation did not lie to its friends, not even to spare them, and a friend kept in the dark for his own good is a friend being done a thing with, and the nation did not do things with children. Grenduk told him at the small stone table over the deep bread plainly in order as he told him everything. That a woman in the ministry who hated goblins and a man in a great house who wanted him for a symbol, made a law that was not really a law and would come to the bank with it and demand him, and that the nation would refuse because it had sworn to, and that after the refusing there might come, from channels that owned no charter, an attempt to take him by force. He did not soften it. He watched the child take it in, and he watched, with the closest attention of his long life, to see whether the floor he had spent 11 weeks building under this child would hold the weight of it, and it held. Harry sat at the table with his father's watch stopped in his pocket and his mother's letter over his heart and the sworn faith of a nation at his back, and he was quiet a while, and then he asked the only questions that mattered, which were not "are you sure" and not "what if they win," but these. "If I go with them," Harry said, "if I just went quietly so nobody got hurt over me, would the oath be broken? Would you all be all right? I don't want anybody hurt because of me. I've had enough of that. I'd rather go back to the cupboard than have Skell hurt, or you, or Uldrock, or any of them, I mean it. If me going quietly keeps everybody safe, then that's what's fair, and you taught me to do what's fair even when it costs." And Grenduk, old Ironcaster, who had fallen in a nettle patch expecting to die and been saved by a child who did not run, looked at the 10th friend of the deep offering at 5 years old, to walk back into the cupboard to spare the nation that had sworn to guard him, and understood fully and finally and past the last shadow of the Master of Gold's doubt, that the council had reckoned true, and that whatever the founding stars had seen in this child they had seen rightly. And he answered the child the only way honor allowed. "No," Grenduk said, "you will not go quietly, and I will tell you why, and you will hear it and you will not argue, because it is law and it is love, and it is the same thing here below, which is a thing the tall folk have never understood. The oath is not a chain we put on you. It is a chain we put on ourselves, freely, taking nothing, the way you gave back the silver. It says the deep will stand between your blood and any power that reaches for it. If you walk into their hands to spare us the standing, you do not release us from the oath. You only make us break it, which we will not do, because a nation that breaks the blood reckoning to save itself trouble is exactly the strong room with teeth the tall folk have always called us, and we would rather be broken than be that. You cannot spare us by surrendering, Karuk Nul. You can only spare us by letting us be what we swore to be. That is the whole of it. Your part is not to protect us. Your part is to let yourself be protected, which is the harder part, and the one you have never once in your life been allowed to play, and you will play it now for us because we are asking you to as your friends, and a friend does not take from a friend the honor of keeping faith." He put one long hand over the child's on the table. "They are coming, let them come. The deep does not tire, and it does not forget, and it will not let go. Now eat, and then sleep. And in the morning we will show them, all of them, the woman and the man and the old wizard too, what it means that the nation of the deep named you friend." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The oath holds they came for Harry on a warm, still evening at the end of the week at Privet Drive, because Lucius Malfoy had understood the one thing about the Goblin's guard that could be turned against it: that the child had to come up now and then into the sunlit world to feed a blood ward the Goblins did not wish to break, and that a child who has to come up is a child who can, for an hour, be reached. Grenduk had come up with him, as he always did, in the shape of the stooped old solicitor, and he was uneasy, and did not hide it, because the nation did not lie to its friends, and Grenduk did not begin with the child now. He had wanted to keep Harry below entirely, and let the ward lapse and tell Dumbledore openly at last. The council had reckoned otherwise, narrowly, that to break the ward now in the middle of Malfoy's public storm would be to hand the tall folk the story that the Goblins had stolen the child outright, and that one more quiet feeding, closely guarded, was the lesser risk. Grenduk had argued against it and been overruled, and had come up himself rather than send another, because if the reckoning was wrong, he intended to be standing in the wrongness when it arrived. He had brought Uldrock's word that the Iron Guard would be near. In the shadows the tall folk could not read, all around the house. He had brought Skell against orders, because Skell had refused with the frankness of the young to let his friend go up into danger without him, and had made himself impossible to leave behind. And he had brought, folded in his sleeve, a thing he had not told the child about, because it was a captain's decision and not a child's burden. The evening was ordinary until it stopped being ordinary. Harry dried the supper things at the sink, with Aunt Petunia hovering wary at the edge of the kitchen and Uncle Vernon behind his paper, and the token lay warm at his breast, warmer than usual, warmer as the evening went on, and Harry noticed it and said nothing, because Gristla had taught him that the token grew warm when the oath was near a weight, and the oath had been humming its deep gathering note under everything for 3 days, and he had learned to trust it and to be steady, and he was steady. He set the last plate in the rack. He looked at his aunt's tired, sour, wary face and thought about telling her to go upstairs, and had got as far as opening his mouth when the world came apart. They did not knock. That was the first wrongness and the last courtesy anyone at number 4 would be shown that night. The front door and the back door blew inward at the same instant, off their hinges flat, and the windows went with them in a single ringing burst, and through the ruin of the front hall came 3 figures with their wands already lit, and the evening filled with a cold that had nothing to do with weather, the deliberate, engineered cold of people who have decided in advance to be frightening and have practiced it. 2 were men Harry did not know, hard-faced, quick, moving with the ugly economy of people who did this for pay. The third was Dolor's Umbridge, in her cardigan the pink of a hospital ward, holding her document case against her chest, and her soft face wore a smile that did not reach any other part of her, and she said in her girlish poured sugar voice over the wreckage of the Dursleys' Hall, "Harry Potter, I am from the Ministry of Magic, dear, and I have come to take you somewhere safe. Be a good boy and come along, and no one need be hurt. There has been a great deal of fuss, and it is time it ended, and it ends when you come with me. Come along now, quickly. It was very well done." She had the writ ready in her hand to wave, revised and resealed, a paper thin enough to fool a muggle policeman and a flustered aunt, and behind her the 2 hired wands stood ready to make the paper unnecessary, and the whole of it was arranged so that a wiser and older person than a 5-year-old might have believed, for the crucial half-second, that this was the law arriving and gone quietly and been lost. Harry was 5, and he was not fooled for even half a second, because he had spent his whole short life reading the faces of people who meant him harm, and he knew the difference between a person come to help and a person come to take, and these had come to take. He did the 2 things Gristla and Grenduk between them had built into him. He did not run, because running told the taker he was prey. And he stood very straight, and he put his hand flat over the token at his breast, and he did not say anything yet, because the old goblin was already moving. Grenduk shed the solicitor's glamour like a dropped coat, and was, in the wreck of the kitchen doorway, an ancient goblin in truth, and there was nothing frail in him now. He put himself between the child and the 3, and Skell came out of the pantry and put himself at the child's other side, 40 years old and reckoned a stripling and utterly unafraid, and Grenduk said, in a voice that filled the ruined house and had in it 300 years of a folk that had been wronged and had learned to be dangerous about it, "The child is Karuk Nul, friend of the deep, and the nation of the deep has sworn the blood reckoning to his blood. And you have laid your hand to a thing that will cost you more than you were paid. Go back, tell the one who sent you that the price was set wrong. Go back, while going back is a thing you can still do." The hired wands did not go back. They had been paid not to, and they were quick, and they had done this work before. The first curse came before Grenduk had finished speaking, and Grenduk turned it. He was a keeper of reckonings, and had been of the Iron Guard, and goblin magic is not wizard magic and does not need a wand. But there were 2 of them, and one of him and a stripling, and the kitchen of number 4 became, for a handful of seconds, a place of noise and light no house on Privet Drive had ever been built to hold. Aunt Petunia was screaming, thin and high. Uncle Vernon had gone down behind the ruin of the table, and did not get up. A curse struck Grenduk along the shoulder and spun him, and Skell caught a second on the arm. He flung up and cried out and went to one knee. And in the half-instant of the two goblins staggered, one of the hired wands lunged past them and closed a hard hand on Harry's arm, and Harry felt the sick lurch behind his navel that he did not have a name for, the hook and pull of a portkey engaged, the world folding to take him away. And the oath, which had been gathering for 3 days, took the weight. It happened in the space between one breath and the next, and Harry would carry it the rest of his life, and never once find words the size of it, and this account will not pretend to more than he had. The token at his breast, which had been warm, went past warm, went to a white blaze that lit the ruined kitchen through the fabric of his shirt like a coal held to paper, and the deep note of the deep, the gathering bell note that had hummed under everything for 3 days, resolved in that instant into a single tolling stroke that came up through the floor of number 4, through the concrete and the earth and the pipes in the dark, up out of the country under the world, and struck. The portkey's pull, which should have folded Harry out of the world in half a heartbeat, met the oath coming up to meet it, and stopped. The hook behind his navel snagged and held and could not complete, because a thing had been sworn on the founding stars, and the deep stone that the deep would stand between this child's blood and any power that reached for it. And here was a power reaching, and here was the deep standing, and the two of them locked in the ruined kitchen, with a 5-year-old suspended between them like the pin of a scale. Harry did the last thing then, the thing Grenduk had told him in the green a lifetime ago, and he did it not in panic but in the clear steady certainty of a child who has been guarded so well and so long that he has learned, at last, that he is allowed to ask for help and it will come. He closed his fist hard around the blazing token, and he said aloud into it in a voice that did not shake, "Grenduk, I am in need." And the deep answered. It answered the way the sea answers a stone dropped into it, all at once and from every direction and out of a depth that has no bottom. The floor of number 4, Privet Drive, did not break quite. But the stone beneath the floor and the older stone beneath that remembered for one impossible moment that it was one piece with the stone of the black stair, and the hall of the 12 ledgers, and the deep galleries where the wards of the nation were not spells laid on but law grown in, and the whole of that ancient sworn strength came up through the little suburban house like water up a well, and the hired wand that held Harry's arm was flung from him, not brutally, not torn, simply loosed. His hand opened by a power that unmade his grip as easily as a grown man opens the fist of an infant, and the portkey dropped from the man's other hand and lay on the ruined lino, dead, its charm spent against a thing 3,000 years old that it had never been made to fight. For it was in the room now, the whole of it, the old cold magic of the deep, the thing Grenduk had called an arch taking a weight, and it was in the kitchen of number 4 the way the sea is in a rock pool at the turn of the tide, an ordinary vessel filled past its brim with something vast that had come from very far away. The light of the token was only the near edge of it. Behind the light, under the floor, in the walls, in the very air gone bright and heavy and singing, was the presence of the founding stars and the deep stone and 3,000 years of a nation's kept faith, and it did not rage and it did not strike, and that was the most awful thing about it, that it was not angry, any more than a mountain is angry, any more than the deep places of the earth are angry when they close. It was simply sovereign. It filled the little house with the plain, unhurried authority of a power that had been asked a question. Will the deep stand between this blood and those who reach for it? And was answering the question, and would go on answering it patiently, immovably, for as long as the reaching lasted, and the hired wands stood in the middle of that answer and felt themselves become, for the first time in their hard, quick lives, small, truly small, small the way a man is small before the sea. And no curse they knew and no coin they had been paid had any purchase on a thing that size. The suburban room could not hold it and did not break. It only rang, every pane already gone, every wall thrumming, the cheap light fitting swinging in a wind that was not wind, the whole house become for one long tolling moment a bell that the deep was ringing to say a thing it had sworn 7 weeks before under the founding stars and would now make good. That the child was not alone, had not been alone since the day a goblin fell in a nettle patch and a 5-year-old did not run, and would never, while one stone of the deep stood upon another, be alone again. And then the iron guard came, up out of the shadows the tall folk could not read, out of the dark at the edges of the garden and the black under the stairs and the places between places that the goblins kept as their own roads, and they came in their hundreds, black-harnessed, silent, terrible, and Uldrock of the iron guard was at their head, and the 2 hired wands who had been paid to snatch a child from an old man and a stripling, found themselves standing in a ruined kitchen ringed by the oldest standing army in the Isles, with the token's white blaze filling the room and the deep note tolling in the floor and the very air gone thick and bright with a magic none of them had a counter for or a name for, and they were not brave men, only quick ones, and quick men know when quickness has run out. They dropped their wands. It was the only wise thing either of them did that night, and it saved their lives, because the iron guard does not kill a thing that has laid down its weapon, holding, as goblins do, that a killing after the surrender is a debt the killer pays forever, and the Iron Guard pays no debt it can decline to owe. Dolor's Umbridge did not drop anything, because Dolor's Umbridge held no wand, only paper, and paper is no use at all against a waking oath, and she stood in the middle of the impossible light with her document case clutched to her chest and her poured sugar smile gone somewhere it did not come back from. And she understood, in the way a person understands a thing far too late to profit by it, that she had built her whole careful instrument on the belief that goblins were creatures near human. Manageable, a line in her own being division's registry, and that she was standing now in the plain evidence that she had been wrong about the size of them her entire life. Albus Dumbledore arrived a breath later, because he had placed himself where he could be reached, and had reached the place the instant the oath told, apparating into the ruined front garden of number 4 with his wand lit, and his face like a winter and his half-moon spectacles catching the white blaze pouring out of the broken windows. He took it in at a glance, because taking things in at a glance was the labor of his life. The child standing straight and unhurt in a column of ancient light with a blazing token in his fist, the 2 hired wands disarmed and ringed by the Iron Guard, the dead Portkey on the floor, Grenduk bleeding from the shoulder and on his feet in front of the child regardless, the stripling on one knee with a burned arm and his teeth bared. And Dolor's Umbridge of the Being Division, standing in the wreck of a Muggle family's home holding a ministry writ she had used as the fig leaf for a kidnapping. And Albus Dumbledore, who had spent a week doing the arithmetic over from the beginning, made in that moment the choice he had told the goblins he would make in the moment, and had never liked making, and made now without a flicker of hesitation, for a child who had thanked him for the truth. "Dolors," said Dumbledore, and his quiet voice cut the noise of the room the way a bell cuts fog, "you will lower your writ. You will lower it because I am the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and I am looking at a scene that will be described to the full Wizengamot in my own words, under oath tomorrow, and the scene is this. A ministry official at night with 2 unlicensed and now disarmed mercenary wands and a portkey, breaking down the doors of a Muggle dwelling to seize by force a 5-year-old child whom a lawful custody, upheld this very week at Gringotts, places beyond her reach. That is what I see. That is what I will say. You have not come to enforce a law, Dolors. You have come to break one in the dark with hired violence, and you have been caught doing it by the one witness in Britain whose word the Wizengamot cannot dismiss." His eyes moved once to the disarmed men and to the dead Portkey, and everyone in the room who could still think understood that the Portkey and the men were evidence, living evidence of who had paid for this, and that the trail of that evidence did not stop at a junior official in a pink cardigan but ran up, through channels that did not appear in any registry, to a long drawing room and a silver-topped cane. The hand behind this will not be named tonight because he was careful, as he always is, and left himself a hired distance from the deed. But he made one error, Dolors, which is the error your whole scheme was built upon, and I will name it for you, since you are about to spend a long time reflecting on it. He believed the goblins were a thing that could be reached, and they are not. Look around you. Look at what has come up out of the ground to stand around this child. This is not a bank defending an asset. This is a nation keeping an oath, and you cannot amend an oath or hire a wand against it or file it into a registry, because it was sworn on a light that does not answer to the Ministry of Magic, and I would have thought, Dolors, that a woman who has spent her life classifying the beings of these isles would have troubled once to learn how large the smallest of them truly are. Umbridge lowered her writ. The magic did not fade all at once. It settled the way it had settled in the hall on the night of the naming, drawing down out of the air and the light, back into the token, back into the floor, back down the well of the world toward the deep places it had come from. And as it went, it left the ruined kitchen very quiet and very ordinary, a suburban room with its doors off and its windows gone, and a stopped man behind an overturned table, and a screaming aunt gone silent with her hands over her mouth. In the middle of it, a 5-year-old lowering a token that had gone dull and warm again on its dark cord, and closing his hand around it and turning first, before anything else, before the ministry or the writ or the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, to the old goblin bleeding from the shoulder who had put himself between the child and the world. "You're hurt," Harry said. "Your shoulder. Sit down. Let me see. Skell, are you all right? Your arm. Let me see your arm. Sit down. Both of you, sit down." And he took Grenduk's long gray hand in both his small ones and drew the ancient goblin down to sit on the one kitchen chair still standing, and fussed over the shoulder with the fierce competence of a child who had been patching himself up alone for 5 years and knew exactly what a wound needed. And Grenduk, who had turned a curse and taken one and stood between his friend and a portkey without a thought, let himself be sat down and fussed over by a 5-year-old. Because there are gifts a person must let himself receive, or the giving is spoiled, and the nation had taught the child to give, and Grenduk was old enough at last to have learned to take. The Iron Guard bound the 2 hired wands, and Uldrock stood over Dolor's Umbridge and did not touch her and did not need to, and the ruined kitchen filled slowly with the ordinary aftermath of an extraordinary thing, and it was into that aftermath, over the wreck of the doorframe, that the last arrival of the night came, on no summons, on his own 2 feet, up the garden path through the shattered gate. Ragnarok, high reckoner of the nation of the deep, in his undyed robe on no state, come up out of the deep into the sunlit world for the first time in 90 years, because a high reckoner does not come up for less than the whole nation's honor, and the whole nation's honor had just been sworn and tried and held in a muggle kitchen in Surrey, and Ragnarok would not have it reckoned by any mouth but his own. He walked into the ruined room, plain and small and still, and the Ironguard touched their brows to him, and Dumbledore, who did not know him, knew him anyway, the way one knows the one truly still thing in a room full of motion, and inclined his head. And Ragnarok looked at the bound men and the lowered writ and the dead portkey, and at the old goblin being fussed over by the child, and at the child, and last and longest at Albus Dumbledore, and he spoke, and his quiet voice carried in the wrecked kitchen the way it carried in the Hall of the 12 Ledgers, because a high reckoner is heard wherever he chooses to be heard. Chief Warlock, Ragnarok said. You have chosen tonight and chosen well, and the nation marks it, and the nation does not forget a thing it has marked. Hear now the reckoning of the deep, and carry it to your Wisengamot, and let it be the end of this matter, for it will be the end of it, one way or the other, and the nation would prefer the way that costs your kind less. He folded his hands. The child is ours. Not as a possession we hold no persons, but as a friend sworn in the old way before the founding stars, and the swearing is done and cannot be undone, and the whole weight of the deep stands behind it, as your official and her paymaster have this night discovered in the one classroom that teaches such things past forgetting. You have seen what comes up out of the ground when a hand is laid on him. Consider it, all of you, soberly in the daylight. There is not gold enough in your world to hire a wand that can stand against a nation's kept oath, and there is not a law in your ministry that can amend the founding stars, and every further reach for this child will end as this one ended, save that the nation's patience is a finite thing and will not always trouble to leave the reachers breathing. That is not a threat. The deep does not threaten, it reckons, and it states the reckoning, and the reckoning is this. The House of Potter kept faith with my people 300 years ago when it cost them everything, and my people keep faith with the House of Potter now though it cost us the goodwill of every wizard above the ground, because that is what faith is, and it is the one currency your world has never learned to counterfeit. Leave the child with those who will die before they yield him, and who have just before your eyes come very near to it and been glad to. It is the safest he has ever been or ever will be. Even you, Albus Dumbledore, with all your careful love, cannot offer him a fraction of it. You know this. I saw you learn it a week ago in a small stone room when you looked at him and your arithmetic broke. Let it stay broken. It is the truest thing that has happened to you in a long life of clever sums. And Albus Dumbledore, chief warlock of the Wisengamot, the most famous wizard alive, looked at the high reckoner of the Goblin nation across a ruined muggle kitchen, and did a thing he had done for no one in a very long time, which was to concede wholly in the open, without reservation. I will carry your reckoning to the Wisengamot, Dumbledore said, in my own words under oath. The amendment will not survive it, and the hand behind tonight will spend a great deal of coin and cleverness escaping the consequences of it, and will likely escape because he always does, but he will not touch the child again, because he now knows what I know, which is that touching the child is not a crime that ends in a courtroom, but a folly that ends in the ground opening. And I will do one thing more which you did not ask, and which I offer freely, taking nothing, because I am told that is the only currency that spends in the deep. He looked at Harry, at the child kneeling by the old goblin's chair with his hand still on the wound. I will be his friend in the world above, not his keeper, not his guardian, not the hand that moves him. His friend in the daylight world that will despise him for yours, an old wizard of some small standing who will stand up in that world and say, when it matters, that Harry Potter keeps faith with goblins and is the better wizard for it, and that any who do not like it may take it up with me. It is not much, it is what I have. I offer it because a straight-standing boy asked me, a week ago, whether I had known about the cupboard, and I find I would rather spend the rest of my life earning a different answer to that question than win any game I have ever played. He inclined his head to the child, deeply, deeper than he had inclined it to the High Reckoner, or would incline it to any king, if he will have it. Everyone in the ruined kitchen looked at Harry, because it was, in the end, and had been all along, the child's to decide, no one being able to answer such a thing for another. Harry looked up from Grenduk's shoulder. He looked at the old wizard a long moment, weighing him with the clear, unfrightened attention the deep had taught him, the attention that read a person true and could bear what it read, and then he said, "You left me on the step. But you came tonight the second I called, before you even knew if I was worth coming for, and you told the truth about the cupboard when you didn't have to. Grenduk says a person is not the worst thing they've done, they're the whole account, and yours has got some bad in it and some good, and tonight was good." He nodded once. "All right, you can be my friend in the daylight." But you have to be Grenduk's friend too, and Skell's and the nations, and you can't ever try to move me again, not even for a good reason, not even for the greater good, because I've had about enough of people deciding things about me for my own good, and I'd rather decide them myself now, even the wrong ones. That's the deal, take it or leave it. Grenduk taught me how to make a deal. He's very good at it. He'd tell you it's a fair one. It is a fair one, said Grenduk from under the child's hands in a voice rough at its edge. Take it, Albus Dumbledore. You will not get a better, and you do not deserve the one you are being offered, and neither, if we are honest, do any of us deserve this child, which is rather the point of him. I take it, said Albus Dumbledore, and something in the old wizard's winter face broke up and warmed, and he looked for a moment less like the most famous wizard alive, and more like a very old man who had been given, unexpectedly, at the end of a long and lonely cleverness, a second chance at a thing he had thought he'd traded away for good. I take the deal, Harry Potter, and its terms, all of them, and I will keep them, and you may hold me to them, and I hope you will, because I have not in a great many years had anyone entitled to. They went back down into the deep before the dawn, all of them, and left the ruined house to the ministry to explain and the memory charms to Tidy and Albus Dumbledore to sit a while longer with the shaking Dursleys, because he had said he would, and because a man beginning a new account starts by paying an old debt, and Petunia Evans was owed, he thought, at least an old man's company through the worst night of her narrow, guarded life. What he said to her, no one ever knew. But Arabella Figg reported weeks later that Petunia Dursley had taken to standing at her back window in the evenings looking south and east, toward London, toward nothing a muggle could see, with an expression on her face that was not sour at all, and that once, when she thought no one was watching, she had lifted her hand briefly as though to wave at someone very far down, and had put it back down again, embarrassed, and gone inside. The world above took the news the way a pond takes a thrown stone, in a shock and then a spreading, and it did not settle for a long time. Albus Dumbledore stood before the full Wisengamot the next day and described under oath in his own unhurried words exactly what he had walked into in a ruined kitchen in Surrey, an official of the ministry at night with hired and unlicensed wands and a portkey, breaking into a muggle home to seize a 5-year-old by force. He did not have to raise his voice. He never did. He let the facts stand up in the great chamber one after another and be counted, and the chamber counted them. And by the time he had finished the emergency amendment to the regulation of the guardianship of magical minors, was not merely defeated but disowned, struck from the record with the particular haste of a body of powerful people discovering they have been made accomplices to a scandal. And every member who had waved it through 3 committees was suddenly and loudly certain he had always harbored doubts. Dolar's Umbridge was not imprisoned, because she had been careful with her paper and could show a writ and a memorandum and a plausible tale of having believed herself lawfully authorized, and because the ministry, mortified, wanted the whole affair to sink rather than to spread, but she was moved. She was moved sideways and downward, out of the Being Division and into a records office 3 floors underground, where she spent a great many quiet years alphabetizing the licenses of the very creatures she had spent her life despising. And she understood every single day of it that she had come within one reckless evening of the largest prize of her life and had lost it, and lost her rise besides, to a nation she had classed as near human vermin and a boy she had thought a lever. And the understanding did not improve her, but it did contain her, which was, the goblins reckoned, sufficient. Lucius Malfoy, as Dumbledore had foretold, spent a great deal of coin and cleverness and escaped. The 2 hired wands questioned gave up a chain of intermediaries that dissolved, as such chains always did, one careful link before it reached the long drawing-room at the manor, and no charge was ever laid against the house of Malfoy, and Lucius appeared at the next ministry gala in robes the color of a storm cloud and expressed, to anyone who would listen, his profound relief that the poor Potter child was safe, and his private astonishment that the creatures had turned out to have such teeth. But he did not touch the child again. He was a careful man, and he had seen the ground open, at a higher distance, in a report he did not put in writing, and Lucius Malfoy did not reach twice for a thing that had shown him what it cost to be reached for. And the wizarding world, over its breakfast tables and in its shops and along its crooked high street, took a great while to make its peace with the thing it had been forced to learn, which was that the most famous child in Britain, the survivor, the symbol their whole trembling age had built into an idol, belonged not to them, not to the ministry, not even to Albus Dumbledore, but to the Goblins, who had named him friend in the old way and sworn to him an oath the tall folk could not amend or buy or break. Some hated it, and said the child had been stolen and corrupted and turned against his own kind, and would say it for years. Some, the wiser ones, went quiet, and thought about what it meant that a nation 3,000 years old had looked at their war and their fame, and their fortune and their idol, and had reckoned, on some scale the tall folk did not possess, that the one thing worth swearing itself to was a boy who gave back silver and shared his bread. But hated or honored, the fact stood and could not be unstood, because it had come up out of the ground one warm evening in Surrey and flung a hired wand across a kitchen and stopped a portkey in mid-pull. And there is no arguing in the end with a thing that will simply open the earth beneath you rather than let you have what it has sworn to keep. The world above learned to say his name a new way after that, more careful, a little afraid, the way you name a thing that has powerful friends in places you cannot follow. Harry Potter, friend of the deep. It did not fit in the old idol-shaped hole they had made for him. They had to make a new hole, an odd one, the wrong shape, and it took them years, and it never quite closed over him, and that suited Harry, who had spent 5 years being made to fit holes he was not the shape of, better than anything the world above could have offered. And down in the deep in the founding halls, with the forge fires banked to a glow and the long iron tables set out, and the whole nation come to see with its own eyes that the blood reckoning had been tried and had held, they kept a feast that lasted 2 days, and Harry sat at the head of the longest table between Grenduk, whose shoulder was bound and mending with the deep steady patience of goblin flesh, and Skell, whose arm was in a sling he wore like a decoration, and about which he had already told the story 11 times, each time with more hired wands in it. By the second night of the feast the story had grown to 12 attackers, and a cursed Skell had turned with his bare hand, and Grenduk let him tell it, and only remarked once to no one in particular, that in his own apprentice days a stripling who embroidered a reckoning was made to copy it out true 40 times, and that standards had plainly collapsed, and that the roast onion had, at least, held up. Harry laughed until the deep bread went the wrong way, and Skell thumped him on the back with his good arm and told him that a friend of the deep who choked to death at his own victory feast would never live it down, and neither of them could have said after what had been so funny, only that it had been, as things are funny when you are safe and warm and among your own and have stopped at last, waiting for the good thing to be taken away. Uldrock came and set a second band of iron-guard iron beside the first, and did not explain it, and did not need to. Grisla came and did not touch her brow, and instead sat down beside the child, which she did for no one, and stayed and watched the feast with her dry old eyes, and near the end of the first night she leaned close and said, so that only Harry heard it, "I read a hard thing at the innermost stone 4 years ago and told no one, and I will tell you now, because you have earned the whole of the truth and not the pretty half. I read that keeping faith with you would cost this nation dear and call down the whole weight of the world above, and that the oath would be tried in fire. And I read it, and I stood before the council anyway and told them to name you, because I read one other thing beside it, which was that the cost of turning away from you was worse. I have kept names 400 years, Karuk-Nul. I have never once regretted a reckoning less. The fire came as I read it would, and the oath held as I hoped it might, and you are ours and we are yours, and the account is good, and I am too old to weep, and so I will not, but understand that if I were younger and softer I would be weeping now, and take it as said." And she rose and touched 2 fingers to the child's brow, the courtesy of equals, in front of the whole nation, and the whole nation saw her do it and marked it, and did not forget. They carried Harry to bed before the feast was done, because 5-year-olds do not last 2-day feasts, oath or no oath, and it was Grenduk who carried him, favoring the bound shoulder and refusing all comment on the fact, the old ironcaster bearing the sleeping child through the warm gold halls of the deep with the small head on his good shoulder and the small fist closed, even in sleep, around a dull warm token and a sealed unopened letter that said in a round dead hand for Harry, "When he's ready." And Skell walked beside them the whole way with his arm in its sling, and Grisla stood in the door of the ledger of names as they passed and watched them go, and high above, further up than the founding halls at the head of the black stair, a plain old goblin in an undyed robe stood at the rail of the high gallery and looked out over the whole country under the world, the tears falling away into the red glow at the bottom of it, the bridges of black iron with their slow gold weather of lamps. The fires burning green and gold and morning blue, and above it all the deep note going on, steady, vast, the arch holding the roof up, the promise keeping itself. And Ragnarok, high reckoner of the nation of the deep, who owned nothing and kept nothing and had come up into the sunlit world exactly once in 90 years to stand between a 5-year-old and those who would use him, permitted himself, for the second time in a life measured in centuries, the thing a high reckoner is not permitted, and found, weighing it on the plain scale of his plain office, that the account had come out even at last, and that it was good, and that the child was home and guarded, and would be guarded in the light and in the dark, above the ground and below it, until his line ran out or the world did, whichever came first, and that neither tonight seemed anything to fear. Chapter 7 End.